31st, 2023 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Welcome to all board members and advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its Twitter page at edstateboard_NC. And you can follow our meeting online and see all the materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board discussions on the agenda items, and tomorrow's agenda is official meeting day when the board will vote on its action items. This is one of my favorite seasons of the year, and I suspect it might be one of your favorites too. All across our great state, from every kindergarten classroom to the highest education program in any of our institutions in our system, we're celebrating the achievements of our students, their determination, perseverance, and the great skill that our teachers deliver to them every day. Graduations mark milestones in the lives of our students. It's a serious but immensely joyful event, marked with the great pride that we feel for our students, their families, their support teams, and their local communities. Graduation for so many of our students represents overcoming obstacles, setting an exciting path forward for the future, and in many cases, leaving a supportive environment to head into the world of enrollment in a post-secondary institution, or enlistment in the armed forces, or employment in the workforce with training and guidance, or a combination of all those things that have been provided during their K-12 experiences. We don't only wish them luck, we want them to know that we are incredibly confident in each one of them, and we believe in each one of them. We know they have a bright future ahead, and we're appreciative to their parents for giving us the opportunity to educate them. This time, would you join me in congratulating all of our graduates across the state? We also have the opportunity during this meeting to thank many of our local superintendents who are with us today and tomorrow. We appreciate your leadership, your service, and your dedication to these students, and we know that this is a favorite time of your year as well. Three of our superintendents that will be joining us during this meeting include Dr. Kim Morrison of Mount Airy City Schools. Please stand if you're here. Dr. Tricia McManus of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, and Dr. Deanne Meadows of Columbus County Schools. Thank you so much. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. Then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you received the agenda last week and have had an opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion to approve the May 31st and June 1st, 2023 agenda.
I'll move approval.
Motion by Ms. White, second by Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz.
Yes.
Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull.
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Dr. Ford. Treasurer Falwell. Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
And Chair Davis.
Yes, motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. We'll now proceed to our discussion of our board items, and we will begin with the student learning and achievement discussions led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Dr. Olivia Oxendine and I have the pleasure of doing the work of this committee. And this is a big morning for the SLA committee. We have two sets of standards, one in draft form and the other in a final form before us today. We're starting out with Healthful Living, but before I recognize some thoughts about the healthful living standards and what we're about to discuss. As I was thinking about this morning, I realized that very frequently this board highlights the importance of meeting the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students before we even get to the academic work that they need to do. These standards are at the heart of that social, emotional, and behavioral health of our children. And they are also at the heart of the portrait of a graduate work. So I think as we discuss these standards today, and as you have an opportunity to review them, you will see those things embedded in all of these standards. So today we're discussing the first draft of the Healthful Living Standards, and I just have to say that the work that has already gone into these standards, including a tremendous amount of opportunity across the state to have input in the content and design of these standards, has been impressive, and that does not end here, because draft one, after we hear about it today, will then go out for surveys across the state with educators and stakeholders. So this is just the first draft of these standards. So let's keep that in mind, and Dr. Day, I'll let you remind us of how we got here.
Thank you. Good morning. We're really excited to be here to hit this milestone for the K-12 Healthful Living Standards. As a reminder, we look at this every month. Our process is guided by State Board Policy SCOS 012, as well as our internal procedures manual. And so on the next page, or the next slide, you'll see that pages 17 through 23 really give detailed information about this process. As Ms. Candace mentioned, we are still in process. This is just draft one of draft three. So what you see today and what we will talk about today will more than likely not be a final product. The key word is process. So we will talk about what has happened so far. We have completed the first draft, and when I say we, it is not the internal DPI team. It is the stakeholders that have volunteered their time and effort and expertise on the data review committee and the standards writing team. And we really want to thank them for all of their hard work that they've already put into this process and will continue to put in this process as we move forward. Our next steps, once we present to you today, we hope to, beginning of next week, to send out this first draft for all stakeholders to give feedback. And this will be through two surveys. One will be PSU specific, very similar to what we did together, feedback and data on the current standards, and that will go to all PSUs to ask them to gather expertise to give us feedback. And then there's an all stakeholder, so that will go out to parents, business leaders, community leaders to give us feedback. And then that data will come in, it'll be analyzed and organized, and the process of the DRC, looking at that and getting a report and providing us to work on the next draft. So it's very typical when we provide, or when we get feedback, we go through this same process. So with that, we have two guests with us this morning who have volunteered their time to be a part of these committees and their time this morning. We have Dr. Chris Brazilla. He's a physical education teacher, Caker Elementary. He was a member of the data review committee. We also have Debbie Bryant. She is the Healthful Living Curriculum Specialist in Buncombe County, who will soon be retiring with 40 years of experience in education. So we are very thankful she is here to represent the standards writing team. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Brazilla.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. A year ago, I got an email from DPI and asking us to look at all the standards and the objectives and to see whether we think they should be changed, kept the same, or just eliminated. So at first I thought, why are we even doing this? These standards are great as they are. But then when I go deeper into them, I'm like, okay, we need to make these a little bit more relevant and more concise and language more clear. So I applied for and was accepted as a part of the DRC, and we met up in Raleigh in December for 2 days of intense action of looking at each one of these standards and clarifying objectives. And as we looked at them, we also compared the results from the surveys, the stakeholder and PSU surveys, which was a very large data source with over 80% of the districts in North Carolina represented. So that was really great, with almost 1,000
responses. So that's a great data source. So then we took that information and compared it with research, current research on physical education trends, both at the state and the national level, and also triangulated that with focus group data and interview data, and also with the responses from the surveys. So we had a lot of data. We had both quantitative and qualitative data that was analyzed using a method called constant comparison. You take the data, you put it into categories, and then you look for trends within those categories. So with all that information, we made recommendations for each one of the clarifying objectives to the standard writing team. So just as an example, what we did, this is the data from the PSU for, can't quite see what that is, but on the left there, you see there's data that we could use to change or to keep the same or to eliminate. So what we looked at is if more than 10% to 15% of the people recommended change or to eliminate, then we said, okay, we need to take a real hard look at this data and to see why they thought that it should be changed. If it was less than 10%, less than 5%, we said, oh, a lot of people think that this is good, so let's just keep it the way it is. Why reinvent the wheel? So again, what we did was we looked at all that data. We looked at that 15% critical point, and then triangulated all the data, and then made decisions as to whether to what the standards writing team should do with that. Go ahead, thank you. All right, so a great example here is the fitness data for grade 4. So the overall standard is, we want students to have a healthy lifestyle. Everyone agrees with that. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing. However, so we kept that it is. That's beautiful, it's short, it's concise, and that's what we want students to do. However, if you look at the objective underneath that, so now we're when I was taking this survey, I said, oh, that looks like there's two things there. We want students to understand how to administer a fitness test, and we also want them to monitor their heart. So right away, that was a red flag for me. So I'm saying, okay, we need to break that apart if we even want to keep that. So then I thought deeper, and I was like, okay, teachers have to go and get training on how to administer a fitness test. And it's we're talking 3 hours to a day's worth of training just to learn how to administer the fitness test correctly. And we're expecting 4th graders to do this? I don't think so. We need to clarify that language and revise it so that it's more appropriate. Same thing with the next objective there. This is now we want them to do exercise prescription for themselves. I don't think so. This is the teacher's job, so we need to clarify that language. And then we took all this data and we compared it to what was happening with the rest of our data sources. So overall, the trends that we were looking at, most of the data suggested that we just, don't reinvent the wheel. It's good what we have, but some of it needs to be clarified. The language needs to be adjusted a little bit, and it needs to be more relevant. So that third bullet point, that's always a concern for physical education teachers. Is not enough time to teach, especially when our 150 minutes a week is divided amongst things like classroom energizers and recess. So another concern that as a physical education teacher that I saw across all the data was that, and you were talking about SEL, since all the hurricanes we had and since COVID, SEL is real big. So we really are, even without standards for SEL in physical education, we are integrating SEL into our classes. And then, of course, the technology involved these days, the kids, if you get the kids to use their technology, that's going to really help a teacher teach their standards and their classes. So I appreciate you taking this time to look at our standards, and thank you very much.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. Wanted to share a little bit about how our standards writing team worked. We had about 20 plus folks who joined us in February. We began the process in February of looking at this. Before we even started, though, we didn't take the task lightly, because Healthful Living is a content area that includes so many different avenues of SEL, the health component, the physical component, and the cognitive component. So we knew we were in for a little bit of a high task, but we were ready for that challenge. The 20 plus folks who met with us, we were subdivided into small groups. We had 4 content areas, grade level and content areas that were working towards the revisions of these standards. We dug very deeply into the data revision recommendations, and so thank you, Chris, for that, for your hard work on that. We took a lot of information and tried to combine all of that, but we also wanted to make sure we did some norms, set some norms to make sure that all standards were doing a couple of different things. We asked that they were rigorous and high content areas. The content knowledge needed for these standards was very high. We also asked that the standards were applicable and could be applied in an authentic way, as well as vertically aligned. So we did that, took that task at hand. We dug through each and every individual standard and objective, and we looked at the verbs. We tried to make sure that they had high-level verbiage in them, so that there were important things for these students to know, so that we could produce health literate individuals as far as when they graduate from our schools. So as we did that, we moved on to the physical education standards, or the health standards. And you can notice that the physical education standards did very similar work. Even though we worked individually with our subgroups, we could hear conversations, and we're thinking, hey, we're right on here. And so we're excited to hear that, even though we did not see each other's work until we were completed with our own. So as we did that, the standards revision team for physical education had a little bit of a higher task involved, because there's a little bit of inconsistency about the number of instructional minutes and hours throughout our state, especially in our elementary areas. We have some students who see their physical education teacher for 30 minutes once a week to 45 minutes, and we also have some that see them daily. So there's a large span when you think about those that might see their teacher 30 to 35 times because of all the other things that take place during the school year, between someone who might see them 170 to 180 times. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but they were up for the task and were able to do so, to come out very consistently with that task. You'll notice on this slide that there is a large decrease in the number of standards and objectives, and one of the reasons for that is that the grade 6-8 subcommittee team chose to go with a grade span, which means that they're choosing a high standard to follow, and the objectives are just different within that. So that's where you will see the decrease in the number of standards and objectives there. The next slide, please. The proposed K-12 health education standards. This is just one example. This is one from personal and consumer health. You will see that this does include high rigorous verbiage, and so that the students can not only research the content
thank you both for making the whole process real and understandable to us. That was great. That was really helpful.
Any questions for either of our any of our presenters? I just had a quick question. Thank you so much for all of this work. I just wanted to know, are the unpacking documents, are they following these standards afterwards, or are you creating them as you go? Because with what you just said about the 30 minutes, 3 times a week, like, I know as an educator, unpacking documents, knowing what you all were thinking as you were going through the process is always very helpful, so.
Yes, the support documents will come after the year of approval, but what they're doing is they're making notes in a separate column that says, think about this, think about that, when you make those support documents.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you so much for bringing these fine folks in to help make this a little more real for all of us. So, both of y'all mentioned SEL integration into the standards. I'm wondering, given the fact that our local boards of education in some cases have pushed back with the use of SEL in some instances and in some districts, I'm wondering if you could provide some clarity around how the DRC and the standards writing teams are defining SEL or social emotional learning.
Sure. As far as SEL, this is really nothing that's new to Healthful Living objectives, because this is something that we've been doing all along. So there was not a big, huge jump when we had that focus of SEL. For a lot of students, physical education is their best part of the day if you compare it to recess. So, so a lot of times just checking in with the students and just letting them know that they are an integral part of the school and that they are connected to the school is huge for us. And as we were writing the standards, we wanted to consider that too, because there's always an emotional connection to these standards as well. Some of it's done through personal assessments or personal best when we're doing fitness testing and things like that, because it allows students to challenge themselves and have an internal challenge, and they're not being compared to someone else. And so that's a huge piece of that as well. Did that answer your question?
Well, what I'm really looking for is how you're defining SEL. Are you using the 5 components that Castle puts out, and if so, could you share what those are, please?
Yes, our district for sure definitely follows the 5 components of SEL, and it is important for us to be able to match those with our efforts in teaching each and every day. Our whole component of this, as far as our LEA focuses on, is the fact that we want to make sure that SEL really never goes away, that it becomes a natural norm for each classroom, whether it is in with that content area or that it is something that's focused on in between.
So, wait, my question hasn't been answered yet, I'm sorry. What are the 5 components of SEL, if at all, that are integrated into the standards? So is there are you all using SEL as a kind of a catch-all for social emotional learning, or are there the 5 components mentioned specifically in the standards?
I'm not sure that they are completely mentioned in each of the standards. It's something, again, that we would take into consideration for the feedback from our stakeholders to make sure that that does happen.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question about I noticed, just get a bit closer to the mic. Early in the presentation, I made note of a comment, or some commentary, maybe by 1 or 2 or the whole group of the committee, about a question in terms of how to address all of the objectives in probably a lesson plan. My question has to do with the objectives. Are they repetitive to any degree from grade level to grade level?
The teams definitely looked vertically to see what type of vertical alignment was happening, and so there is a little bit of repetition where you grow a little bit with that objective. So where they might start baseline here, they grow a little bit, so they're growing on that knowledge. So they're definitely looking at it vertically, and as we go through the next 2 drafts, that becomes even more important, is that vertical alignment.
And then another question about the design of the standards in relationship to the objectives.
Mhm.
At the high school level, I notice the number of standards are the same, or maybe, my question is there repetition across grade 9, 12 in terms of those objectives? Do those objectives remain constant, 9, 12?
Yeah, I'll let
They probably,
I'll let the experts.
I know I'm taking this a little bit.
So the 9-12 objectives are just one set of objectives that are taken any time between the 9th grade and the 12th grade. So students don't take a class in the 9th grade, 10th, 11th, 12th. They're only required to take one class
I see.
in high school. So those would be for whatever class they take at whatever year they choose to take that semester
Okay.
requirement. And that's what's required for graduation. It's a half a semester of health and half of physical
I see.
education.
I understand. Very good.
While we have Dr. Essick at the microphone, I do not live in the SEL world, and I'm thinking that those listening might also want a reiteration of what those 5 components are.
Oh my God.
Because I admit and bring it to the table, I do not know, and it would be incredibly helpful if somebody would share that with me.
Oh boy, I need some help. Well, self-regulation. Somebody want to help me? Self-awareness,
Healthy relationships.
healthy relationships.
Regulation of behavior, I think you said already. Decision-making. Yeah.
And it's interesting, as we look at those, before SEL was ever called SEL, those have been in our standards. We've always taught self-regulation. You wouldn't have a first grader that you didn't try to teach self-regulation. There wouldn't be, decision-making skills are an important part of development of every student we have in a public school. And every teacher every day is dealing with conflict management and conflict resolution. So those are things we're always doing. At some point we added those words, and that gave it a little more controversy than it needed. I mean, those are skills we all hope our students will know and be able to do when they walk out of our classrooms.
My point in asking the question is to get it on the record that these are what the 5 components of SEL are, and that are things that we should expect all of our children to be able
Absolutely.
to do throughout their K-12 journey.
Just
Yes.
for clarity, Dr. Essick, if you've got the list of the 5, let's just hear them clearly as. I think
Thank you for validating my request.
Thank you, Ms.
so
Floyd.
that we do have that deeper understanding. of what you're learning.
Self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness.
Which are all 5 woven into the portrait of a graduate competencies as well.
Yes, and all through all of our standards and in many of our other content areas, they are also intertwined in those content areas as well. So it's about the skill.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Any other questions? Thank
Okay.
you.
Can I just say that thank you to all our folks from our school districts that worked on these teams. They worked really hard and we're really proud of their work. And it was so energizing to watch them work so hard and do such a great job on this work. So just want to thank the entire team, especially Debbie and Chris for coming today and putting themselves out here with you all but also to a whole team of folks who worked really hard to do this work. So thank you to all of them. Thank you.
A big first step, but we look forward to seeing what the people who take the survey across the state and how that affects this next draft, and we'll eagerly await that. What was the timing of, do we have a timeline for that? About what it would be the timeline for draft 2, would you guess?
The survey will go out hopefully Monday, and we're going to leave it open until September. Just because of summer, we want to make sure we get strong feedback. So September is when we would have it back. The teams would work until December, January probably. We're taking it nice and slow, making sure we get all the feedback we need.
All right, thank you, Dr. And so, on to the action on first read, more standards. This is the very beginning of another step. Well, it's actually
Yes.
not quite the beginning. So I'll let Dr. Day talk about what the action on first read is: permission to revise the standards for K-12 arts, guidance, and world languages.
Yes, a lot of standards this morning. We're very excited to bring forward and ask for permission to begin the review phase of arts, guidance, and world languages K-12. For the past year, we have been in the review stage. Or in the review stage, we would like to move forward to the revision stage. Each month, we give you a Friday update on that work, and so this is a culmination of what's been done over the last year. Looking forward to moving into revision. This is just what we're going to go over this morning. We're going to give you an overview of the process so far, a timeline, that data and research that's happened, and then next steps if permission is granted to revise. You see this slide a lot. This is our policy, SUS 012, and then of course our manual. A little bit of a difference between Healthful Living and Science. Healthful Living and Science have been given the red light, green light many times, and then finally when we were given the full green light, we moved forward asking permission to do the whole process, review and revision in a very crunch timeline. We are going back to the process that's outlined in this manual where we have a year of review, and so we gather data, and then we come to you and say, this is what we've learned through the data, this is what the data review committee is saying, do we have permission to move forward with revision? So just a reminder with standards and curriculum, standards are the what and the curriculum is the how. So right now we're talking about the standard course of study for 3 areas, arts, guidance, and world languages. So we're not talking about the text, the lesson plans, those activities, assessments, those tasks. That is a local decision of how to teach those standards. So we keep that in mind as we move through all of our standards work with review and revision. Our timeline over the past year or so, this past summer in 2022, we kicked it off, and we began that standards research and legislation that you've heard about with Science and Healthful Living. So these 3 areas looked at states, they looked at national frameworks, national standards, policies, legislations that touch that content area, and we also released the very first surveys. So asking for feedback standard by standard for an all-stakeholder and a PSU specific of those current standards. Do they like them? Do they want them to keep them, modify, change? What would they like standard by standard? And then into October and January, we moved into focus groups and interviews for each of the content areas. Those surveys wrapped up. We gathered that data. Office of Learning Recovery helped us with that analysis and organization. And then in February and March, the DRC, and there were DRCs for each of the content areas, so it wasn't just one big DRC for all 3. They were separate. They began their work, and they completed that work in April and into May for each of those 3 content areas. I also want to note that within these content areas, the arts has 4 content areas within it. We have visual, music, dance, and theater arts. So when I say arts, it encompasses all 4 of those. So just to give you a view of the data for each of these areas, for the arts, we had 75% of LEAs, and if you'll remember that first survey, that's our threshold. We want to hit at least 75%, so we have a strong basis for that feedback. And then you'll see that all stakeholder responses was a little over 1,600, and then focus group and interview participants. For guidance, we were at 74%, very close to that threshold. We had about 1,100 responses and 14 participants in focus groups and interviews. For world languages, we hit just above 84% of LEA responses, a little over 1,100 all stakeholder responses, and 142 focus group participants and interviews. The world language standards are built through proficiency level. They are not built per language. So you don't have a set of standards for Spanish, Latin, whatever it may be. They're proficiency level that goes across all. I believe there are 18 languages taught in North Carolina public schools, and that blankets all of them. So just want to clarify that across our standards. The DRC, as you've heard over the last year or so, their work is the same as it was with Healthful Living and Science. What we did is we sent out applications for each of the 3 committees. We had an internal agency review committee, so it was not just the Office of Academic Standards, and it was not all of just the content area team. One member from the team took the applications, took off any identifiable information, and asked other members of the agency to help choose those members based on selection criteria. So they did that. They selected the members. In the application, we asked for a reference, and so we also made reference calls and then notified and confirmed their committee representation. So what they did is they explored the data and the research They had a 2-day orientation and work session, a very intensive 2 days that kicked off how to look at the data. They were given lots of data. As Chris had mentioned, DRC gets lots of data. And so we talked to them about how to read the data, the spreadsheets that they fill out, all of the work that they would be completing. So they came together, got to know their teams, looked at the data, got to work on those spreadsheets, and then created their data review committee report. So from that, we're going to look at each of the areas and those major findings and recommendations that came out of the DRC. These are just recommendations. So once it goes over to the writers, they can or may not take these recommendations based on other factors that they're looking at across the standards. So these recommendations are just ones that came out of this first survey of the current standards. Whether or not they make it in draft 1, 2, or 3, that depends on the whole process and the different groups that are working together. So for across all of the arts, because again there are 4 areas, there was some ask for additional support documents, which would come during installation, inclusive language, which may speak to ability, students' ability when it comes to the arts, and then more of a global approach to how we take a look at music, dance, theater arts, and visual arts. And then at the bottom, you have specific areas and specific recommendations. One that cuts across all is the idea of technology. Technology in these different areas. And again, these standards have not been updated since around 2010 or 11. So it's same with Healthful Living and Science. It's been a number of years. So updating that technology, if we're thinking about AI-generated music or those tools that they use for some of those different areas. So you'll see just the different, I'm not going to read them to you, but you'll see the different ones there. One other one I wanted to point out was in the visual arts was the funding considerations. One thing that was very clear in the data is they wanted to ensure that the teachers could teach the standards without having to have a large amount of money. If you think about pottery and materials you have to buy for pottery, those funding considerations can become a barrier to being able to teach those standards. So they just want to ensure that those standards can be met without implications of large amounts of money. For guidance, guidance came away with one recommendation. This is a little different than what you'll see with the arts. There are a set of national standards called the ASCA student standards, their mindsets and behaviors, and that's from the American School Counselor Association. And what they heard in this very first survey, over 70% of the survey respondents said that our state standards should not be separate from the ASCA standards. Most of school counselor prep programs use the ASCA framework and standards. So when they come out of that school counselor prep program, they are now given a separate set of standards to teach. And while they are very similar, the DRC went through and compared. You'll see in the DRC report there's a spreadsheet, and they crosswalked the current standards to the ASCA standards, and they are very, very similar. Most of the content were addressed in both. They also researched and had there are 11 other states that have adopted the ASCA standards. It also aligns with some of the national and state work that's been happening with the Diamond Award, which we recognized a few months ago, and then the RAMP process, which is around school counseling, that comprehensive framework for school counseling. So the idea would be that another survey is a little different than what the manual outlines. To ensure that we are getting full stakeholder thoughts and feedback, the idea would be to send out a very brief survey with the ASCA standards, with our current standards, and ask stakeholders if their thoughts and input on adopting the ASCA standards. And then the DRC would take a look at that very specific data and think about and make recommendations as to if that would happen. Okay, and then with world languages, they have 3 recommendations. One is around using a framework, a national framework with Healthful, which is the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. They have a world readiness standards. It's a framework that defines the central role of world languages in the learning career of every student. So they want to kind of pair that with a can-do statement with the National Council of State Supervisors for Language to kind of use that as their taxonomy or framework. That's what they've kind of heard in their data, not the standards per se, but as their framework. They also would like to increase the rigor of student outcomes. Again, these are proficiency standards, so looking at raising those proficiency exit expectations for programs and courses, and then clarifying wording and objectives, and provide those details that are very unique depending on that type of language or that program or course. So if approved to move forward with revision, in June and July, we would open up applications for the writing team, and then we would also do the same process we did with the DRC, where the applications would be blinded, and internal DPI outside of OES, Office of Academic Standards, would help choose those teams. They would be selected, and draft one would begin in somewhere between July and October, tentatively. We would hope between January and March, draft one would be released for feedback. We would gather that data. Draft two would be worked on within those couple months. And then April to May, so in about a year, we would come back to the board with draft three for your discussion and action. This would not, depending on how the guidance standards and that survey would come out, we would come back to you with those results of that brief survey, asking very specifically about those mindsets and behaviors.
Before I open up to questions, Dr. Dan, could you just sort of very briefly sort of explain why we're doing these three right now and right on the heels of science and healthful living and what your ultimate goal is here in terms of the timeline for standards review?
Yes, it does seem like we're doing a lot of standards right now because it's been a number of years for a number of different areas. So when we're looking at 2010, 2011, it's 10 to 13 years. So we're trying to get back on our track of 5 to 7 years. So we have an outline of stair-stepping from now on. So our goal after this year, we really feel like after this year, we'll be able to get to a stair-step of one content area in review, one in revision. That comes out of revision, one goes into review. So ELA has begun their review. So once we get past this cohort, we'll be able to stair-step from now on and keep with our 5 to 7 years as opposed to 10 years.
Questions for Dr. Becker?
Thank you for that question. It's what I was going to ask. Related to that, are these three, the one we're being asked to authorize proceeding now, arts, guidance, and world languages seem to be very separate things. Are they three separate standard work, or are they putting these all together?
They're separate. They just are running at the same time. But they're very separate. They have separate teams. They have separate content areas, separate reports, separate standards.
So this would essentially put us in the process of doing 5 standards at one time with the 2 that are already in process.
There'll be a year, yes, but the installation and implementation will be a year behind Healthful Living and Science.
But as we sit here right now, we have
Yes.
5 going. So the
Yes.
question then is, do we have the personnel and do the districts have the resources to support the work from the field to do 5 at one time? Or have 5 in process at one time? That seems like a big ask.
It is a lot. Our teams are fairly small, but we have gone through the review phase. Because of our manual, we have our process very well laid out. As for districts, I think we hear a number of different things. We hear these need to be updated. These are very out of date. This is not where we want our students to be with these standards. It's a lot of standards to be implementing. So we kind of hear different comments on that.
Are the districts that are concerned that they need updated, it's one thing to express concern, it's another thing to volunteer your employees to be people from the field who are part of the team that make up the standards, right? So really part of that is the districts behind enough support to have 5 in process at one time.
We have
in addition to the department, which I think is its own set of stresses.
Yeah, we've communicated with CAOs. We give them monthly updates. We have not heard too much from them in terms of this is a lot at time. It depends on the size of the district. A lot of the smaller districts, you have one person who's in charge of multiple areas. Larger districts, they have one per area. So a lot of that, and our plan is to stair step from now on. Policy says we're supposed to every 5 to 7 years review standards, and we've doubled that in some of the cases. So we've really communicated that we are trying to get into a stair step so that this will not happen again, and that the standards will be updated for our students in a timely manner.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing, and I hope you understand these questions are expressing concern as to whether or not that's a workload that you can continue to maintain.
Yeah.
Just for clarity, CAOs or chief academic
Academic officers, yes.
Judy.
So following up on the vice chair's question, and this may be more for the superintendent, I recall in previous discussions, one of the issues that we identified is the range of resources and skills available across our districts in being able to unpack these standards, choose curriculum, and actually deliver the teaching on these standards, which is the heart of what we're trying to achieve, and that variety typically plays out in that the districts that have the fewest resources and the less skills are the ones with oftentimes the most challenged students. Unpack these standards. So the question is, what are we doing about that? And how are we working on supporting those districts that need more of our help? Superintendent, or I'm sorry, it's Ms. Candace.
Ms. Cameron's go ahead. So there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. First of all, when this issue that you're arising, which was a very real issue, initially reared its head, that was during the history standards, which we were adding new coursework, new courses for graduation requirements, and we vastly changed our standards throughout that process. When the more we change the standards, the more work it creates for the unpacking process. And that's where we were seeing districts that were larger and had more central office resources contracting out. If this board recalls, I, in a survey to superintendents, learned that districts were spending anywhere from $0 to $1 million to help teachers unpack the history standards. Now, I would hazard a guess that that is not the case when we update standards. So updating standards is very different than rewriting standards and adding new courses. However, one of the things that Dr. Marr and his team are doing is looking at software that will allow for us to, without requiring, because as Dr. Day very clearly and accurately stated, the department does not do the unpacking work for the districts, and the department does not dictate the curriculum or the lesson plans to the districts. But what we can do is offer that support to districts who wish to choose it. And Dr. Marr will be coming before this board at a later date to describe what we are doing to help, especially districts that have a lot of new teachers, like in our northeastern districts, where turnover is higher and we have a preponderance of new teachers, to have access to high-quality vetted lesson plans that would be aligned to our standards.
Can I ask a follow-up? Yeah, thank you for that answer. Then how about we bookmark in the SLA team to revisit this issue as we move down the road with each of these standards, and particularly the cumulative effect of, even if they're just revisions, 5 groups of standards, how we can help our districts.
Yeah, I think one way to do that would be for us to engage in a representative sample of our local superintendents to ask them where their pain points are and what their heartburn is with each new set of standards that come out, because they're really the ones that know how to answer your questions best.
And within our process, we do a needs assessment every year where we will specifically go to every district and say, what are your needs this year throughout the installation year and then throughout the time that those standards are implemented.
So as is embedded throughout this process,
Yeah.
there's a communication, two-way communication. Thank you. I will take note of that. Any other questions?
Just a quick question, tied to the whole concept of streamlining and simplifying. Would there be what would be an advantage of our state adopting the ASCA counseling standards?
So the DRC went through in a crosswalk and they were very similar, and a lot of school counseling prep programs use the ASCA standards across the nation, across our state. And so and these guidance standards are taught by school counselors, but also by classroom teachers. And so it would eliminate kind of 2 sets of standards that are out there that are across of our states. Similar standards, but still 2 sets.
Right, as long as think you were gonna conduct a survey.
We are,
To
yes.
determine if the field feels
Yes.
like that might be the way to go. That would help tremendously.
Yes.
Depending on how regularly, at the national level,
Yes.
those standards are changed.
It's similar to our English language development standards, which are WIDA, so we update those every time WIDA updates them. It would be very similar in that process, yes.
Thank you.
Right, and then we'll move on.
Okay, one final process question. So, you guys have worked very hard to, put, a set of processes in place for us to revise these standards. Have we included that revision with the drop process? And by that, I mean, have we looked at the calendar and standardized sort of in our calendar where things unfold so that we've defined the appropriate amount of time for our PSUs to be able to unpack those documents and implement those new standards with fidelity? Yes, so our goal is to bring standards every spring, and then the whole next year is when installation happens. So they would not install that next year, they have a whole year to get those standards in place.
Another reason to get this aligned on a
Exactly.
regularly
Yes.
occurring timeline.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you all for the discussion. Thank you, Dr. Day, and thank you to our visitors for sharing your experiences with us. Several discussion items. SLA 2 is a recommendation to eliminate the Compliance Commission of Accountability and to repeal SBE policy ADVS-000. Dr. Howard.
Thank you and good morning. This item is indeed to recommend rescinding ADVS-000. It is in reference to the Compliance Commission that was established in 1997 to provide input from stakeholders on the evolving at that time accountability model. That group used to meet face-to-face for several years and provided that feedback. Eventually, the State Board of Education, in its policy, directed that the Compliance Commission only meet at its direction to address questions put forth by the State Board of Education. After that time period, it evolved that the Compliance Commission was primarily used to review appeals for participation in what we refer to as standalone field tests. So, of course, we used to have separate tests where we field tested items that would then be used later for an operational test. So, as we have evolved throughout the years, we now embed our operational tests with those field test items. So the last time that the commission met to review field test appeals was in August of 2018. We do not have any work for them to do in this arena. It is not legislated that there has to be an appeal process that involves the Compliance Commission or any other body. There are requirements around field tests with respect to the number a school can participate in and with respect to the timing of those field tests. If we were in a situation where we had to have a standalone field test, we would, of course, engage in a solution for making sure that districts have an opportunity to appeal participation in that. But to maintain this Compliance Commission, which is a burden on the participants, for their time and their commitment and absence of their requirement to have a meeting, it is our recommendation that we rescind it at this time.
Questions for Dr. Howard? Mr. Duncan.
This may not be a question for Dr. Howard, but in the event that we have an appeal and we no longer have the Compliance Commission, which has been, as a matter of course, however infrequently, hearing the appeals, we conferred with our legal counsel as to what appeal methodology we might have put in place to assure that that option is available in a way that's set up with some form of a protocol.
Right. We did not consult with our legal team, partly because there is not a legal requirement to have those appeals, but in good faith, I think we would have the assurance that we would make sure that our public school units had an opportunity to provide evidence for why they should not participate in the field test. And at that time, we most definitely would consult with our legal team to make sure that we did that in a way that was fair and equitable across the state.
My only suggestion or comment would be better to have a protocol before you're doing it in the midst of an appeal that's being made.
Okay.
So I think it would be helpful to be proactive on that on the front end, just so we have a process that occurs.
Since this is an item for discussion, perhaps over the next, between now and the next meeting, we could
Absolutely.
have a
Yes.
little more information on
Yes, we can do that. Thank you.
Our next item is SLA 3, which is SBE policy amendments to the 2024-25 CTE course inventory, SCOS-005. Mr. Michael.
Good morning to you all. Ms. Chemnitz and Dr. Oxendine, want to thank you all for allowing us to update the board on the CTE course inventory. Go ahead, go to the next slide. CTE has been working very hard to continue much of the work that we started, it's been 4.5, 5 years ago now, 2018, 2019, as the U.S. Department of Education and the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education required each state to develop a new state plan for the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st Century Act, also known as Perkins 5, much shorter when you just say Perkins 5. To recap our work over the past few years, you see on the screen, we had a transition year. We set performance indicator baselines. Those have actually been updated since then and approved by the Fed. We did build our career pathway programs of study, which we do analyze, review, and revise each year as appropriate. Built our comprehensive local needs assessment and have since revised that to suit better the needs of our businesses and our local communities. We set credentials as our measure of program quality, and then we also built and developed and infused the Big 6 essential employability skills. We are transitioning these Big 6 to the Portrait of a Graduate Durable Skills currently, and applaud the superintendent and her team for highlighting the incredible value these have to a student's future success in the workforce. To continue on, 2020-2021 was a full year of Perkins 5 implementation. We've updated you annually on the revisions to this document, including pathways, which are referenced in Perkins as programs of study. The course inventory document presented today is for the 2024-25 academic year, so that registration materials may be printed in advance. And I did actually confirm that recently, meeting with the school counselor about my daughter. Yes, they do appreciate having those documents out that far in advance. So a very good move. And they'd still print them, which is, but I applaud them on that. That's a good thing. As we consider our course inventory and programs of study or pathways, we have embarked on a very serious discussion about the brand of CTE, or should I say the organization of the programs offered within CTE. For comparison, the umbrella of academic services includes math, science, social studies, etc. Yet I don't hear teachers call themselves academic services teachers. They call themselves science, social studies, etc. Similarly, CTE includes animal science, business, finance, and marketing, healthcare, construction trades, computer science, IT, technology, etc. I could go on and on. Many, many disciplines within CTE. We want you to know that our leadership team will be working to improve the branding of the disciplines within CTE so that parents, students, and local businesses are better informed about the opportunities that exist within local public schools. I cannot tell you how many times I've had people, mainly friends of mine, say, you know, I took a construction class when I was back in school. Why don't you offer that anymore? Well, we do. We have 30,000 children enrolled currently. So we want to work on branding that so that people know what we do every day in our public schools. We also want to inform you of changes at the national level regarding the Career Cluster Framework. I'm fortunate to have a seat at the table as a member of the National Advisory Committee. This process will take quite a while and will impact each state and how it reports performance to the U.S. Department of Education and the Office for Career, Technical, and Adult Education. Our team is currently soliciting industry representatives to serve on the industry advisory groups. As the work progresses and as the time becomes more appropriate, I'll plan to provide further updates on this work. So as we look at these revisions for our course inventory, it's important to note that we've updated and realigned our work-based learning options for each course in the inventory. What you see on the screen is our, in a very small graphical representation. I apologize for that. What you see on the screen is our new graphic representing the work-based learning cycle of experiences. It's important that all stakeholders recognize and assist students with their career planning and development. That means recognizing that a student will engage in career awareness activities in elementary school, career exploration in our middle schools, and career preparation in high school. This graphic is a circular picture representing the notion that students may engage in these cycles multiple times based on their interests. In your board materials, you received an edited and heavily struck through, very messy looking Word document and copy of our proposed CTE course inventory, as well as a summary of changes that highlighted many of the changes that were in there. Over the next several slides, you will see a highlight reel of these changes, and I will not dive too deeply into each of these, but do want to place special emphasis on the bottom of this first slide. So if we could slide up just a little bit. Perfect. Thank you. The new edition of the course called Career Exploration is a modular approach to career development exploration for our middle grade students. This new option will allow districts the flexibility to offer a course with 30 to 90 hours of content based on local need. Modules will be available for multiple disciplines and will include exploration activities, interest inventories, and discussion on the best path to reach those careers. The license requirements will also be flexible, as any teacher with a CTE license will be eligible to serve as the instructor for the course. I would also like to highlight the shift of our personal financial literacy course from family consumer sciences to career development. We recognize the high school content lives in the economics and personal finance course, but also understand the appetite for a head start, if you will, in middle grades. As with the career exploration course, any teacher with a CTE license will be eligible to teach this course. And so over the next couple slides, you have, again, a highlight of some of the changes, some new additions, some modifications. We did work on every single one of our course descriptions. We wanted to change them from kind of a, well, to be honest, a boring read to something that was a little bit more active and engaging for children to see what they might actually be buying when they bought into one of these courses. One final piece of information we would like to make you aware of. We're excited about this. 2 weeks ago, the community colleges did approve our statewide articulation agreement for CTE courses. It's been in the works for over 2 years, and we are proud that 53 of our CTE high school courses, or a combination of those, will now satisfy a credit at the community college. Very excited about that. With that, I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you. Presentation. Any questions for Mr. Healthful? Great work. The direction that we're heading on this is very exciting.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're trying to be very responsive to local need, to our local businesses, to our local schools, consider many of the things that you talked about today. And I have a great team, a few of which are here today. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to SLA 4, another State Board of Education policy amendment. This is course for credit, CCRE-001. Ms. Shackel.
It is so great to see you all. It's been a couple of months, so it's nice to be here with you all. We also do have Dr. Chrissy Brown, Ashley, and Lori. Oh, there she is, who actually chose for me to present, and they're hovering, but they're the ones who did this fantastic work. So please just know that, and this is a cross-agency effort between CTE academic standards and advanced learning, just so you recognize the impact of this great work. So we are here to update course for credit, which is kind of one of our overall academic policies here at the department. And we're here to focus on honors programming. It is part of the small but mighty team's work in my area. And really, we start seeing the benefits at this time of year, like Mr. Davis said, with these incredible students graduating. We heard about that fantastic student out in Duplin County Mr. Keenan, who's going to Harvard with a full ride. It's just incredible, all the amazing things that are happening across our state. So we are here to look at honors programming because this is an area that we really haven't paid a lot of attention to in a little bit. And when we did some research, we found out that 84% of our graduating seniors enrolled and earned credit in honors courses during their high school career. Now, when we talk to CAOs and others about this, they're like, well, yeah, because we're really working, right, on raising rigor and opportunities. Sneha, we're doing what you want us to do. But honestly, we were like, really? That's a lot of students taking a wide range of these honors courses. So we do recognize the impact of honors courses is great. But we also recognize that we really want to make sure we have statewide guidance and a framework so that we're ensuring that local flexibility is still critical in it, but also ensuring fidelity around the honors courses. And districts have been incredibly supportive of this. So here you'll see kind of our history with honors courses. We actually had an initial framework back in 2004. 2013, we did a major revision, and some of us were here. Now I'm looking at Anne Marie and some others of us. Not many, but there were a few of us here. But we paused that then. It was involved with sending portfolios in. It was this incredible process. But it was a little bit much. So Dr. Garland and I, during the recession, were like, yeah, no, we're stopping this. And LEAs appreciated that. But what we did realize is we still needed to revamp and really ensure that we're giving the field what they need in a reasonable fashion. So we have been working, we started pre-COVID, paused. Not critical during COVID. And now we've been really working on getting significant feedback. And so this is what we bring to you in the hopes that by the end of 2025 school year, we'll have even better honors level courses around our state. This team did surveys multiple times, focus groups multiple times, a comparative analysis with other state honors work, several rounds of feedback from teachers, state consultants here, AIG leaders, and chief academic officers. We took every comment to heart. For example, the CAO said, we need some more time. We need some more time. We can't do this right away. So we shifted the timeline. And so, which was great, and we're happy to do that, right? Whatever we can do to support the field. So I'm going to quickly just review with you what we have in the policy, really, with our goal being to strengthen the fidelity, the consistency, and the implementation of honors level courses across the state. We have a definition. We talk about inherently honors courses, the different levels of responsibilities in a district and a guide, right, to help districts implement these well, and then our responsibilities here at the department. We provide a definition that we really haven't had a clear one. Very simple, right? There is a clear difference between the standard level course and honors in the scope and depth. We need to have that very clearly outlined. And then we talk about what that means, how we need to adjust the pacing, right, to look at that depth and that scope. We need to really ensure that providing depth and rigor. So we do have a lot of courses that are, a lot of variety of courses with honors indications, ranging from some PE courses to statistics, right, and all across there. And we want all of those courses to have depth and rigor with what they're doing. We then further go on to talk about what the PSUs, what we're saying is we're going to have an honors level course guide, and then they're going to develop these courses using that course guide, and that they'll attest by the end of 24-25, so 2 school years and 2 summers, to that, hey, we've checked these over. Don't need to submit anything, just we've checked these over, we're good to go. And then this idea of every 3 years, if they have new courses, just making sure that we've looked at this very simple tool that we've developed. It's probably the most simple tool I've ever developed. and it's they have ever developed for the team, and we're super excited with that. In our guide, so our goal is to provide a guide, right, Mr. Davis, to your point, what kind of support do we want to give to the LEAs? And in that, again, we give background, we talk about the GPA extra quality points, et cetera, all the policies that relate to this, all in one place, so our district administrators and teachers who are doing the hardest work of all have that. And then this tool, which you'll find the actual tool in your e-board attachments, but I'll kind of review them. Dr. Oxendine mentioned that, and I'm so glad she did, because what we do is look at advanced learning indicators. We say, okay, do we see acceleration, extension, enrichment? That's like, do we just see it? Do we have depth and complexity of the standard course of study? And then, do we see some variety of instructional practices there that we think are critical, right? Do we see PBL, inquiry-based learning, in-depth analysis, multiple perspectives, et cetera? And then a tool that districts or teachers or grade level chairs, however people want to, sitting in their planning sessions, can look at and say, we're good. We're good. And so just some general overarching support that the districts have asked us for, that we also believe is really critical to ensuring fidelity of implementation for our honors courses that impact 84% of our high school graduates. So it's really, when we think of return on investment, this is where that is, right? This is the one of the things we can do across the agency to really have an impact. Mr. Davis, we always think about our support for the field, so of course we'll do the honors course guide. There's a draft in there. A lot of PD across the agency. Then we do want to gather pockets of excellence to share, and maybe even look at courses and have districts that are able to develop those more easily. Maybe they can share them with others. So maybe some type of repository. But the key is that we are working on this intentionally with our districts to ensure the fidelity of these courses and ensure our students are really moving in that right direction.
Stunned by the 84% figure.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody else is as well. Yes.
I just want to use this as an opportunity to, again, commend Sneha Shah Coltrane's work around the universal screener for AIG. Again, this was something that got misreported on last year. The idea that we are not in North Carolina moving away from supporting our AIG students. We are trying to keep the standards high while expanding more opportunities for children to be identified as needing AIG support services through the universal screener. That is key to ensuring that we keep this 84% participation rate in honors courses high. We want all students to have the opportunity to be able to participate in these advanced learning courses, and ensuring that that universal screener is in place will help ensure that that 84% figure stays high. So thank you so much for your dedication.
Thanks to all of you. Power and working across the different divisions.
Yes. Working across silos.
That's right. Good work. Our last discussion item is SLA 5, which is, ta-da, Dr. Dayback, the proposed K-12 science standards.
Good morning again. We are very excited to bring forward draft 3 of the proposed K-12 science standards. It's been a long but short process across the past year or so. So I just want to extend thank yous to the science team and then all the members of the DRC and the writers. that worked on these. We have 3 guests with us today that I'll let Dr. Aiken introduce in just a moment. As a reminder, if these are approved, so they'll come back to you in July for action. If they are approved, installation would take place in the 23-24 year. So that's the year of support, supporting documents created, and districts will get support from our team on how to implement and update as they need with these new revised standards. Initial implementation would then take place the next year in 24-25, where those standards would go live, so to speak. Again, here's our policy. It drives all of our standards work, and then our internal procedures manual, pages 17 through 23, really detail and outline where we have been in the last month. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Aiken.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, to our audience and our audience listening in. This is a very exciting moment for us. Before I get started, though, I do want to recognize a few individuals who represent a larger body, and then also the team that I am blessed to work with here at the agency that's made this possible. First, just to recognize a few individuals. Representing our Data Review Committee is Tyler French from Onslow County. He is I'm going to try to get this right, because he told me about that, the Science K-12 Content Coordinator. He's actually also one of my former students, so that was pretty awesome. And I did not pick him. We were blind, but I was honored for that. I also want to recognize Olivia Deese. She is the lead teacher with Robeson County Schools, one of our members of our writing team. And next to her is Kelly Gray Anderson, who was until recently an elementary classroom teacher with Iredell Statesville, but now is working as Associate Director of Outreach with UNC Charlotte, also representing our writing team. And then I know I'm supposed to be going really fast, but I do recognize behind me we have 3 of our 4 members of our K-12 science team who have spent the last year making this possible through their facilitation, coordination, visiting all 8 board regions, conducting focus groups and interviews and so on. So I won't make them stand. I'll suggest it, but I won't make them do it. But representing our K-5 elementary science team is Dr. Deborah Hall. Representing our high school team, we have 2 members in our high school who worked collectively to kind of deal with life sciences and physical sciences, but Benita Tipton and Alexis Wood. And then, unfortunately, Gavin Friedel, who is our middle school science coordinator, couldn't be here today, but they represent the 4, I won't say small, but they represent the 4 who've made this possible. So getting to why we're here today, we thought it was important to kind of recap the process, since this is a draft 3. We've been here, I think, 13 times over the last 13 months since we got started. The process was guided by the state board policy and the manual that you've heard mentioned several times, initially adopted in February of 22, and then most recently revised in April of 23. We did use a hybrid approach. You've heard it discussed. We conducted both the review and revision phases within the 1 year for the reasons that we've mentioned. And then an emphasis throughout this process, we had several guiding principles that we worked hard to make sure led this work, and that included that we always look to obtain and use the feedback we get from our stakeholders, that this process was research and data driven, and that it was led by a community of North Carolina educators. So specifically speaking to the process of obtaining and using stakeholder feedback, there was both qualitative and quantitative data. We did hold regional focus groups in all 8 state board regions. We also held interviews, one-on-one interviews with community members, representatives from higher ed, civic groups, professional science education organizations in North Carolina. And specific to draft 1, we also utilized an advisory team which had members representing many of those, as well as specifically parent representation. We also conducted a number of large-scale surveys, total about 14,000 responses between them, and we conducted those at each of the various parts of the drafting process. Which also leads us to thinking about this process being research and data-driven. We did start, like Dr. Day mentioned, with the most recent group of surveys or standards that are coming up. We conducted research looking at other state standards, national standards and frameworks, even international standards. We even looked at the advanced placement frameworks, making sure we were trying to feed and utilize all of those. Quantitative and qualitative analysis was done at every single stage, thanks to our partners with the Office of Learning and Recovery, looking at qualitative and quantitative data. And we did have an established data review committee that was separate from our writers that specifically was tasked with looking at that data and analysis and coming up with conclusions and recommendations at each and every phase of the process. And I'll ask Mr. French to come up in a little bit and give you some more information about the data review committee. And then lastly, as we just mentioned in introducing our guests, this process was led by a community of North Carolina educators. We had 27 members that helped with the data review committee, representing all state board regions of North Carolina. We also had a standards writing team, again, a separate group, primarily composed of classroom teachers, but also included instructional coaches, non-formal educators, members of our higher institutes of higher ed. Life does take over, and we did lose a couple along the way, but we still had 35 members overall. So just to kind of now bring it down to draft 3 specifically, we did follow a very, very similar process to how we did draft 1 and 2. The only exception is that per the manual, previously in the surveys that were released, we did 2 surveys. There was one specific to our charter schools and districts, and then one that was, we would call all stakeholder, which went out to everyone. And we were asking it previously for objective by objective feedback. This time, per the manual, what was released was a single survey that went to anyone and everyone, and what it asked was 10 guiding questions overall, reviewing the standards and asking for input. And we have an example here in a second, but asking for input on the collective for that grade level. But they did have opportunities to also still provide comments specific to as many of the standards or the grade levels that they wished for. But previously, like we did, that information was reviewed quantitative and qualitatively by our colleagues at OLR. The data review committee met virtually in early April, and then immediately after that, our writing team got to work in late April, early May to work on draft 3. So I think previously we had shared some similar charts, and you saw our colleagues earlier share something similar. On my left hand screen, you'll see one example where the questions were a little bit different. Previously, you would have seen more standard by standard. I think, like our colleagues, Healthful Living colleagues mentioned, it was very specific to the objectives. This time, it was questions like, are the standards written at an academic level of rigor appropriate for the grade level? And what our colleagues in OLR were able to do for us was give us an analysis of that question. You see sort of each of the grade levels, and then you can kind of see the bands where they still could say agree to strongly disagree and so on. On the other side, since they were still able to give comments, one of the things that we asked for this time was to really try to hone in on where were there some opportunities to still try to make those last tweaks and suggestions. So we received lots of comments, but we really asked for feedback on what are those things that we maybe still have not yet been able to check off, or is there anything else we can do to make these absolutely the best possible standards possible. So you have one example where 3rd grade, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the trends that we see in the data. But I just want to make sure you know that we definitely received far more comments than you see the totals there, but we really were just trying to hone in on some specific places where we could make those last edits. So I'm going to ask Mr. French to kind of come up and talk with you a little bit about his work in the DRC. What you see on the screen, though, is really overall, since we started way back in the summer, there were definite consistent themes that really kind of came up that our DRC members put in their report. So I want to share a little bit about that, and then we'll share a little bit about specific to draft 3, some of the things that we saw in the feedback for that.
Good morning. So initially, when the data review committee met, felt like days and days and days, hours and hours of digging through data and research, regional trends in standards. These were some of the initial trends or themes that we identified as needing to be incorporated in our next generation of North Carolina science standards. So a lot of what we saw was stakeholders wanted us to keep a lot of the content the same, but maybe streamline in some areas. So streamlining in terms of, combining some things in certain areas or moving them totally. We also saw the kind of a consensus for embedding the science and engineering practices, so really the application-based learning methods in science. Then we also saw a need for or a request for consistent use of language across grade levels and across the different strands. So. All right, so then moving into this last draft, some of the feedback was obviously different in terms of how we could support the implementation of these new standards. So when we were reviewing that last bit of data, we again saw, the need for refinement in the wording and language of some of the standards. We also saw a need for supporting documents. So those are sorts of things like boundary statements, assessment examples. We'll teach this, but we don't go this far. We'll teach this, but not this in those objectives. And then we also saw a need for, obviously, some additional professional learning on the science and engineering practices, on the use of the support materials that will come, unpacking documents, things like that, and then support for teachers and learning communities in our schools.
A couple other things. So one of the things we've also thought a lot about is making sure that we try to make some overt connections for our field, thinking back to the CTE presentation that when we list certain science skills and practices, what are some industries in North Carolina that would immediately match up to, so that our students and our families understand there is immediate application, there are careers in the area that you can go to. And also thinking about the supports, we've already begun drafting some timelines, thinking about where we can be over the course of the year, how we can present ourselves over the course of the next year, and thinking about whether it's just simply communicating the fact that there are new standards all the way to really beginning to support our districts and our teachers when we think about teaching with the science and engineering practices. And actually in a second we'll try to talk a little bit about that. So every single time that work was written up in a formal report and handed to our writing team, and we follow the same process that we have. They meet right away, they take that information, and they begin kind of looking through the suggestions, trying to vertically align their work. Certainly sometimes, something in fourth grade, they may have had a real suggestion. We try to figure out how would that impact, say, third or fifth or even other ones. So, and one of the nice things is we still continue to work alongside our colleagues in Exceptional Children and the extended content standards writers that were there. So that's been something we've done every single phase. So actually, if Ms. Deese would be willing to come up and just talk a little bit about kind of as a representative what they worked on this past time with our writing team.
Good morning. So when we met to work, when we draft 3, we initially looked at the DRC report, which was very organized and detailed, so it made it easy for us to really go through and analyze. And we really worked on just clarifying the wording of certain standards and objectives to improve the readability, but also make them clear and concise, so educators would know exactly what the standard is asking. We also looked at the vertical alignment specifically in each domain, just to make it easier for educators and for students, the buildability of the content and the reinforcement. And then lastly, as an educator, what I was really excited about was the additional suggestions and notes to DPI staff for future support materials. So through each draft 1, 2, and 3, we made a lot of notes about what teachers will need to be successful. So things like pacing guides, unpacking documents, boundary statements, and then just resources in general, and any type of professional development our teachers will need.
So through their work, we've now sort of arrived at draft 3 and wanted to take a kind of a flashback all the way back to the 2009 standards. And one of the things I think you'll see through that is one of the requests was not to eliminate or add a lot of content. And so overall, the number of standards that you see really did not change much. But we also definitely heard the desire to try to be more concise, eliminate what's really not needed, merge some things. And so we saw a lot of that at the high school level. So what you'll see in the numbers is really an attempt to kind of do both. The number of standards did not change, but we definitely tried to be way more concise with what's in those standards. One of the other documents that we already do have ready to go in a draft form pending board approval is a crosswalk where you can kind of see what the differences are. And actually, I'm going to, there's Reese, she's standing right now, I didn't let her go very far. I'm going to ask Ms. Deese to talk a little bit about especially kind of the wording that you'll now see in the draft or draft 3 when it talks about the embedding of these science and engineering practices, which is something very new for North Carolina.
So if you look at the crosswalk document on the right, you can see the comparison of the 2009 standards with our draft 3 standards and objectives. So we kept the verbs, so analyze, explain. We moved towards the revised Bloom's taxonomy, those verbs. But the biggest addition was the use of our SEPs, our science and engineering practices. So we're kind of moving from just giving students the content to really allowing them to do science.
Since we've been talking about these science and engineering practices, we want to take a moment to actually list them and kind of describe real quick what it is that would be different, what it is we want to see our students doing in the classroom. And to kind of set this up, it was mentioned earlier that this work sort of started right about the same time we began really rolling out the Portrait of a Graduate. And one thing that our writers and our DRC members and even our field members who responded was we saw a moment here where really two things happened to converge. And one of the things we talk about is building standards that actually really engage our students, but not just content, engage them in the practices and the durable skills that we know they're going to need. Actually, I'm going to ask Kelly Anderson to kind of come back up and just talk a little bit about, as an example from a teacher perspective, what these practices are and what we hope to see happening in our classrooms while the content is the same. What are students doing with that content?
Good morning. So the science and engineering practices serve to emphasize the skills that students need to be able to apply the content that we're already teaching. And these skills support educators and students alike in the desire to develop those durable skills, which will obviously benefit our students in all post-secondary opportunities. So as an example, a previous 4th grade objective was to classify rocks as metamorphic, sedimentary, or igneous based on their composition, how they're formed, and the processes that create them. And that led to some opportunity for different interpretation of how that would be presented to students, which may have included something like reading and recalling a specific fact about granite or a specific process, whereas now with the addition of the science and engineering practices, it will read, carry out investigations to classify rocks as metamorphic, sedimentary, igneous based on their composition, how they're formed, and the processes that create them. So the addition of that phrase, carry out investigations, allows our students to have that hands-on experience. They're physically holding the rocks, or if needed, using an online representation or photographs, and they're actually getting to think about the specific traits, and they're learning to think critically, make observations, and do the actual skills that they'll need in the field if they choose to pursue it. And that's then also increasing those durable skills that they can apply more broadly. So another example is also 4th grade, inferring ideas about Earth's early environment from fossils, plants, and animals that lived long ago. Again, could have a lot of interpretations of how that was presented and the outcomes looking like it was different or different animals lived then, whereas now the phrase with the change of the verbiage as well as the science and engineering practice will be analyze and interpret data to explain how fossils suggest ideas about Earth's early environment. So as you can tell, that allows them to be really looking, thinking critically. In my classroom, we were doing that as I had a project with Guadalupe Mountains National Park, and we had different layers and photographs and rocks, and they were saying, oh, you know what, this is sandstone, and look, there's seashells in it, so we know that that was not always a mountain. And they were getting to decide, okay, you know, that was an ocean, and really thinking about critical thinking, communication, and explaining, which are skills they can use way beyond, you know, fossils. So we're really excited I'm really excited to see this path forward and the durable skills our students are going to get through this process.
So our ultimate product, we hope, is represented with this graphic, which is when you think about our standards and our students and our parents and community in the middle, these science and engineering practices being added to our standards document begin rotating through and around those durable skills. And I think our team has done an excellent job, and I commend them. And the other thing to mention is, Kelly represents a lot of our teachers who are actually already doing this. We just haven't recognized their work for doing this. And I think our feedback came through that we really wanted to say that is what we want happening in our classrooms, and to recognize their work that they've been doing this. So we're excited about that. And so at this point, I think it is my honor to turn this over to Mr. McCoy to talk about the work that our colleagues in Exceptional Children have been doing.
Good morning. I'm going to try to hold my excitement because, as some of you know, this is the first time we've been presenting along our content experts, and so normally we come a year after. So this is really an exciting time for the state of North Carolina and for our office. And so I bring you greetings on behalf of Dr. Caroline Hudgens, our Senior Director. Again, my name is Dreama McCoy, and I really want to thank our lead consultant for significant cognitive disabilities who has led this process, Matthew Martinez, who is in the audience back here. Next slide, please. So here you'll see the Every Student Succeeds Act details how students are expected to learn. It is important to note the difference in complexity for students with significant cognitive disabilities who are participating on the alternate achievement standards. This slide details the effect of ESSA or ESSA and the creation of the alternate academic achievement standards for the students who are on the 1% assessment. Next slide, please. So the state of North Carolina offers 3 criteria listed within this table for identifying students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. We have a guidance document that is located online for IEP teams to be able to offer them guidance on how to make the determination of a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities. North Carolina assessed approximately 9,368 students using the NC Extend 1, which is our alternate assessment for the 2021-22 school year. Next slide, please. You'll see the comparison of the course of study. As you can see, majority of our students, even with a student with a disability, are assessed in the general education standard course of study. Again, there should only be 1% that is the students with the most severe cognitive disabilities participating on the extended content standards. Next slide, please. Listed here is what we know about our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. We know they are able to learn. We know they need more time. We know they need more time for practice and opportunities. We also know that our teachers who are experts in the standards-based learning, and they need a mode of communication. And so that is really the biggest difference of them showing their the way they are able to grow and learn. In the Exceptional Children Division, we also make sure that we have high expectations with decreased rigor, breadth, and complexity for our students who are participating on the alternate assessment. Next slide, please. As you know, we have followed the same process along with our colleagues in the science with the new internal procedures manual. And so with the exception of a couple of differences, one, we did not have our DRC team, and two, once we finalize all of the draft, the third draft that we just were proposing today, we do consider all internal and external feedback in order to make sure that we are able to have our students at a high level, but also make sure that there is some reduced complexity in order for them to be able to access the content. Here you'll see the breakdown of the writing groups, the grade bands K2, 3-5, middle school, high school biology, and high school earth and environmental science. Next slide, please. So as indicated from my colleague Charles, feedback was collected through a single all-stakeholder survey released from February 23 through March 26, 2023. And the survey focused on 10 questions examining the draft standards and objectives while with an opportunity for comments and feedback. Qualitative and quantitative feedback was reviewed by the Office of Exceptional Children. The standards writing team met virtually in late April, early May to review the results and to start work on draft 3. And finally, again, the OEC reviewed all the draft that our educators presented, and we did make some modifications and changes based upon that internal and external feedback. Next slide, please. Finally, the OEC is proposing to remove the life science course, which the last time that was revised was 2011, to reflect the new earth environmental science. That is the biggest difference that you'll see in our high school projection. Next slide, please. And to just end with the positives, well, not end completely, but collaboration again with our writing team, science instructional knowledge for rigorous yet attainable standards and objectives for all learners. Provides a model for how our districts can include all teachers. This is so important that many times EC is to the side, but this is really a model for all teachers to work together in order to have professional learning and instructional resources that they can share across, and instructional resources can be purchased for all the classrooms. And so here today, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Lilly, who's from Camden County, one of our writing team members, to discuss this process.
Thank you. I am Jennifer Lilly, and I'm very happy to be representing Camden County in the Northeast region. But even more so, I'm happier to be representing all the exceptional children's teachers as part of the standards writing team. And it was a team of us, and we all did work together. So before I start, I want to say that this was one of the top 5 experiences for me professionally. So I'll say my number 1 was being a North Carolina teaching fellow, because it got me where I am today, got me in the classroom. Number 2 was my recent experience as being a Kenan fellow. Number 3, hello. Number 3 was being part of the rubric writing team for the Portrait of a Graduate, surprisingly enough, for collaboration. I want you to keep that in mind as I finish my little speech here. And then, of course, this experience is being part of the standards writing team for the extend content. I'm still waiting for number 5, because I did say top 5, so I'm looking forward to my 5th experience. That's still open. All right, so as a well-seasoned EC teacher, I've had many opportunities that have helped me grow as an educator, understanding the processes of education. So most of those have been kind of what we are doing, how we are doing it, but this really helped me understand why. And those are the biggest experiences that help me grow as an educator, and I think help, inevitably, the students in North Carolina. So not just understanding how we do something, but understanding why we do something. This experience was one of those moments, and I have not ever written standards before, but I cannot imagine doing it any other way because of the collaboration. So that collaboration is key for basically inclusivity. So inclusivity of me as an EC teacher, not doing it a year from now without having the tools that the EC teachers need, but doing it in the moment, collaborating with those people at my table. So as an EC teacher, I always kind of envision a triangle. This is something I've explained to parents, whether it's in an IEP meeting or just planning meeting for students, as well as administrators. So I kind of envision this triangle, and you have the 3 points of the triangle, one being the parent, and the parent is the actual child expert. They know their child better than anyone else. The other point being the EC teacher, and that's the disability or the specially designed instruction expert. And then you have the general ed teacher typically, right? And they are the content expert. And always, always that student is in the middle of the triangle, and we are supporting that student through all 3 of those points in the triangle with the ultimate goal for success and achievement, no matter what disability might be in question. So the whole time we were going through the revision process of this and all of the rewritings, I kept that in mind in this process as well. It just shifted a little bit of who was at the points of that triangle. So again, we had the EC teachers at that table. And so we were the disability expert and the specially designed instruction experts. We had our content experts. This time they weren't just general ed teachers. They were there, but we also had other stakeholders. So we had people who were community members, teacher prep program representatives, government agencies. And then the third point in our triangle was DPI. And so DPI is an entity, but also our DPI representatives that were working directly with us, whether it was through the EC division or through the science division. So they were guiding us through this whole process. And again, I envision that student being in the middle. So all of the students that I've worked with now, will work with in the future, being supported by the decisions and the conversations that were happening at that table. So again, there's that word collaboration. So the EC collaborating with others to boost inclusivity. Making content available to our special education population that really had not been available previously when having to write something a year later. So as I thought about what I might say to you guys today, I'm never really short on words, and any of you guys who have spoken with me or visited my classroom might know that. I did kept thinking about the State Board of Ed mission and vision, and kind of how does this fit with the mission and vision of the State Board of Ed. And here are just a few words from it. So, to guard and maintain the right of a sound, basic education for every child in North Carolina public schools. And every public school student in North Carolina would be empowered to accept academic challenges. And so even we speak about the 1%, no matter how a student is impacted, how significantly they may be impacted by their disability, they will have those academic challenges through this new writing process of the science standards. Thank you.
Okay, just to wrap up on a testing timeline, if these standards are approved in July, we would move forward with that testing and assessment timeline. So in summer of 2023, training of teachers and content experts to write the items aligned to those new standards, if approved, would take place. And then we would contract with teachers and content experts to write those test items, embedding into field testing in the 23-24, again, if adopted in July. And then in fall of 2023, we would engage teachers and content experts to recommend the test specs. And then in 24-25, we would build and administer new operational assessments. In July 2025, that is when teachers and content experts would come together for the standard setting to recommend academic achievement levels, and then they would come forward to recommend those academic achievement levels to the State Board for adoption in August of 2025.
First of all, thank you to all of you who, once again, have really helped us understand the experience of this process and how much incredible input we've gotten from our experts and from teachers across the state. So thank you for representing those working groups. Any questions for any of our presenters? Ms. Breyer.
So one piece of feedback that I received from the field is that the technical terms or the teaching of the scientific method has been eliminated from the K-12 science standards. But when I remember what I know about the scientific method, and I see the slide that presented the science and engineering practices, I see a lot of similarities, that those are skills that would be used along with the scientific method. But it gives me great pause that we would eliminate that practice, because it is still a standard practice in the career world. Can you speak to has the scientific method been eliminated? Where does it appear? And I'll stop there.
Well, I think that one of the things that our process and the science and engineering practices focus on are the variety of skills used by STEM professionals in the field that go beyond the traditional scientific methods. So the scientific method is one means to science practice, but there's also many other practices and skills that students would need. So they're going into the environmental ed field, right? And they're studying, let's say, birds or hawks. I used to work for Penn State's Environmental Ed Center. So when we were out in the field doing citizen science and doing that work, we weren't following the lab procedures that one might think of. So a lot of students who were exclusively using the scientific method were envisioning their idea of science as in a lab. And we know that science and technology, engineering, and mathematics all happen way beyond the lab. While that is one setting, it happens and it's not the only. And so the idea of these practices are they could be used in that. If that is the method, it might be used in a chemistry class still. However, the practices highlight the breadth of the careers those students might be going into and the durable skills they need for all of those.
So, great explanation. Has the scientific method been eliminated from North Carolina's proposed K-12 science standards?
So that question has come up during this process, and actually something that the science team and I had talked about and wanted to clarify. So actually I've asked Alexis Wood to come up to deal specifically with the question of the scientific method being a standard that existed in 2009. So Alexis, if you'd like to come up and clarify that.
Hi, thank you for the question. The scientific method is not a concrete part of the objectives, of the standards and objectives as is. It is something that has traditionally been taught in textbooks for science. The traditional definition of the scientific method is more that is one that is viewing the practice of science as something that is linear, that I'm going to complete step 1, and then I'm going to immediately follow step 1 with step 2, and then I'm going to immediately follow step 2 with step 3, and so on and so forth. Whereas scientists and engineers in practice don't follow necessarily a linear process. They go wherever their observations, their data, their experiences lead them. And sometimes that's a very cyclical type process. So there still is the, okay, I'm going to start out with observations and ask questions and see what I can actually investigate. And then I'm going to see, well, how can I measure that? So these practices, these scientific and engineering practices are still in line with this idea of the scientific method, but it's not pigeonholing students to the idea that it's a set of steps to be followed in order. Does that make sense?
And just to state, if you were to look through the 2009 science standards, you're not going to see the specific steps of the scientific method laid out. They are not they were not previously in the 2009 standards. That's something that's come up before. In the introductory paragraphs that we used to set up the draft standards and the documents that go with each grade level, there were statements that said the scientific method certainly is a piece to teaching all of this. But if you were to look for a standard or an objective in the 2009 standards documents that specifically said you will teach these steps in order, they weren't there. They never were there. It was a practice to accomplish teaching the content that has always stayed the same. We did not remove nor add to that particular piece of it other than adding the scientific and engineering practices. But we didn't test for that. That wasn't something that we specifically put down, but it was a practice that has always been there, and we did discuss it in the introductory paragraphs to the actual standards. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ms. White, but they weren't specifically mentioned previously, so we didn't make any changes in reference to that. We didn't add or subtract from that.
Yes, so are you saying that there's never been a standard, or in the last 20 years there hasn't been a standard in our K-12 science standards that says students will identify the 5 steps in the scientific process?
They weren't there in 2009. I don't know that I can speak to past that.
They have not been in the 99 standards. We've never had that standard, and it is an objective.
I mean, the scientific method is one of the things that I can rattle off my tongue. One of the few things from my K-12 education that has stuck with me as someone who's not a scientist since the 17th century. It has been the empirical way of conducting scientific experiments, not just in the United States, but obviously in the rest of the world. And it seems to me that it would form the basis, certainly in elementary school, of understanding all of the things that you just described. And it also would seem to me as not a scientist that the extent to which one follows the steps of the scientific method as we all know it depends on the type of science one is practicing. And so why would we leave it? Certainly the idea that listing as a standard that students will understand various scientific processes or methods, if there is more than one, would be included in our standards.
I mean, we would certainly take that feedback moving forward. But I just want to clarify that we've been told we took it out, and we did not. That was not something that we did.
Can I just follow up? Yeah. So thank you for the clarity that it has not been removed. I would also argue that even at the most rudimentary, in kindergarten, first, second grade, those basic principles of what's the question? Well, what do we think, predicting what we think the answer is. Let's put a couple of different ideas on the table. You followed that same method in all, you asked the question, do the standards need to be changed? Let's collect some data. Let's review the data. So you're using that. And so I would argue that the slide is fantastic. That is an incredible, very well developed selection of tools that support the very process that is not articulated, so I hear, anywhere in our standards. I would suggest that very early on, we ought to be teaching our students, and then as they age forward and use their different skills, that of course they would have a variety of different ways of approaching the answers to questions. But thank you for clarifying.
Dr.
Mine is going to be a slight point of personal privilege, if I may. I am delighted to see Olivia Dees. She's a former student, just last semester. She finished at UNCP with a degree in school administration. This is the first time I've ever seen her. Because my classes were remote, online. We did exchange a few text messages in the course of, it was an independent study, just between Olivia and Olivia. And a few text messages along the semester complimenting each other on our unusual Southern name. So, hi, Olivia. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right, last comment. Yes.
Thank you so much for all the work you did. I just wanted to make one observation for feedback. For physical science, all of the standards use the word understand to start the standards. While some of the objectives within those standards use different verbs, I would encourage us to look at the fact that an entire course has understand as its standard verb, especially because we know in high school a lot of students who are not on an advanced track take physical science, and so we want to make sure that we're not perpetuating an environment of low expectations in that course.
Like I don't know if the team wants to answer. The only thing I would add is that when you look at the RBT verbs for the actual objectives,
right,
almost all of those are actually at a higher level for RBT. But thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the feedback.
It's just it's the only one of all of the courses that is like that, so it's an anomaly.
Good feedback. Thank you all. Thank you, Doctor. Very quickly, we have 3 consent items. SLA 6 is an approval of remote academy applications for the 2023-24 school year. You may remember that earlier this year we authorized 42 remote academies for next year. This is a late application from Northampton County. They have submitted the application, it's been reviewed, and it's being recommended for approval. SLA 6 is the State Board of Education appointment to the Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children. We'll be voting to approve 3 appointments, Ms. Opal Blair and Ms. Peyton Davis to represent parents of children with disabilities, and Dr. Pamela Watkins representing local education agencies. And those are the empty slots on the council right now with those specific groups that need to fill them. And then finally, SLA 8 is the State Board of Education endorsement of North Carolina Portrait of a Graduate. we will be voting on the following endorsement. I move that the North Carolina State Board of Education endorse the North Carolina Portrait of a Graduate. Profiles of a graduate provide the broad strokes for a range of skills and dispositions that go well beyond the standard course of study. In creating them, North Carolina and many other states are working to ensure that a high school diploma reflects the academic and the durable character-centered skills necessary for students to prosper in the next stage of their lives. The North Carolina Portrait identifies the 7 competencies of adaptability, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, empathy, learner's mindset, and personal responsibility. A student possessing these competencies upon graduation from high school will be better prepared to succeed in the place of work, be it college, career, or military, which aligns with the State Board of Education's Goal 1 to eliminate opportunity gaps by 2027, and Objective 5, which is to increase post-secondary enrollment, employment, and/or enlistment. So we will be voting on that endorsement tomorrow. And that concludes the work of the Student Learning and Achievement.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Any questions on that last item? Very good.
I have a quick question. Maybe I've lost the meaning of learner mindset as one of the criteria of the portrait of, within the portrait of graduates. So what, explain to me, perhaps Superintendent, you could do that. What does that mean?
How about if I pull up the whole thing and give it to everyone and can do it at lunch?
That would be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools, led by Ms. Amy White. Ms. White.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy White. I'm the chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee, along with Mr. Kamnitz. We serve as a leadership team, and I'm going to welcome John Blackburn, who will be working on this committee moving forward. We've got a big agenda this month, and so let's plow right in and start with EICS 1. This is a request from Clover Garden Charter School, and they are requesting a temporary relocation for its 9-12 school in Alamance County. That's in Burlington. So the facility to house their new high school is not going to be ready, and in order for them to have a place for those students for this fall, they found a retail space about 2.5 miles away from the existing location, which will allow them to begin their program for those students as planned until the new facility is ready. Ms. Vaquero, do you have an update to that or anything else that the board needs to know to approve this request?
Good afternoon, everyone. No, that you covered it. It's a temporary relocation just for their high schoolers for this summer until they get the new facility.
Any questions from colleagues? Wonderful. EICS 2 is Aspire High School before us with an enrollment request for just 32 additional students. So this is a charter school in Mecklenburg County. It's a trade high school in Mecklenburg County, and due to some enhancements at the facility, they were able to add some additional classroom space. It will open this fall, and so they're before us asking for the ability to offer seats to an additional 32 students. Ms. Vaquero, what did I miss?
You have it, but we will also be discussing the school more in depth later this afternoon. This is an RTO school, a ready to open school, so it's in the planning process, and later on the agenda I will give you the preliminary recommendations for all of those schools planning to open this fall. So that's why it's before you, because it's a new school. It would need your approval.
Okay, questions?
Give me a little help with the process. They're not yet approved as a school.
Well, the charter application was approved. They're in the ready to open process, that planning year that's required. So they are scheduled to open this fall. But in order for that to happen, we bring you those final recommendations this month and in July. And once we get that approval in July, that's when the charter agreement is issued.
Okay, so we're, just so I write in my mind, we're voting in July to approve them to go forward if that ends up being the decision of the board.
Mm-hmm.
but we're being asked today.
Mhm. Because they're enrolling, well, they're currently in the enrollment process, so that they can start in August.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. It's a little unusual at the time, but I suppose it can't be helped.
To bookend, one of the tenets of the charter agreement is that the school has to be at 80% capacity, and the schools, when they get their initial approval from the state board, begins a process which they market to the community that they have open seats. And so in that marketing process, sometimes they have, and you'll hear us say, oh, there's 900 students on the waiting list. And so when this school in Mecklenburg County put their information out, they had a good response in offering seats, and it's for meeting the demands of the career tech and something truly innovative for that area. It's just a request for them to, because they have classroom space, to add 32 students. And so in the 2-year process that it takes for a school to go through, get their charter and open, the second year is the ready to open year. Those schools appear before the Office of Charter Schools, where a number of different questions are asked. You're going to hear later in the agenda the preliminary report for schools that are ready to open, and then they'll give us a final report in July. And so this one, the timing is a little bit weird, but they need to know whether they can add those 32 students and offer those seats to those kids. Yeah, and we usually have maybe 1 or 2 schools that request, like this next one, Movement Northwest, during the summer as they start to enroll. They kind of figure out what their numbers are, and so we usually have some late requests. Further questions about this particular school? Since, Ms. Becerra, since you mentioned Movement School Northwest, why don't you go ahead and review EICS 3 for us and their actual reduction in numbers. It is also a school that is opening this fall, but they're, instead of asking for an increase, they've taken a look and they're asking for a reduction. Exactly. This is also a Mecklenburg school. This is the Movement, like kind of a sister schools, and they've revised as they've kind of grown and understood like what works for them. They've revised their process to start very small. They start with K-1 only, and they're asking to go from 250 to 125. So it's a reduction. They have realized over time that getting first graders is a very difficult thing to do. So they are focusing now really on kindergarten. And then they'll age forward as those kindergartners become first. So their enrollment will grow, but this first year, they're asking for a smaller number than originally asked for in the application that was approved. Yeah. Questions? Okay, EICS 4 is actually not a charter school issue. So this is the approval of Restart applications coming out of Wake County. And there are 4 schools in Wake County who already has a very robust, active, well-defined system in place for many Restart schools. And so Ms. Garber is here in the audience to answer any questions that you might have about these 4 schools in Wake County seeking approval.
Ms. White.
Yes, Dr. Hall.
Thank you. I've read that particular request, and the Restart is not new, but they have 30 now, and these 4 will be 34. I just question what other 30 has done. You see what? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
What?
Hi. I'm just questioning what the other 30 has done or is doing that the 4 new ones could replicate, duplicate.
How they will replicate the use of flexibility or their progress, or
the flexibility side, the instructional side, the organizational side, whatever. They have 30. Well, I know Wick is a big system.
It is a big
I realize
system,
that.
yes,
And 30 is nothing to me, probably.
yes.
But in my mindset, I'm just questioning the 30. Have they performed outstanding through the process? You know, we know that they all are low performing, but that's one of the criteria. You get my point?
I do, yes. So what's the progress, current progress? I'd be happy to investigate a little bit more for you to be able to share specifics. And we will be able to bring that, we are bringing to you in August a state summary. If you want specifics about Wake, I could bring that as well at that time, or bring it to you in July. But I would say from a standpoint of their progress, I can give you a general progress report that there has been progress for those schools. From recollection, they have 2 schools. Thinking back on, and this is just ad hoc from memory, I know that they have a number of schools that we were concerned about that we would have deemed required support, and from the original data in 19, and they have moved off of that kind of level of concern for us. So there's progress there for those schools. And I think it would behoove me to go and make sure that I look at their data specifically and give you that, but absolutely.
Appreciate it.
So.
Thank you. Chair White.
Any other questions? Just reiterating, we've asked that question a number of different ways, and so their staff, Julie and Dr. Martin, have been preparing to bring a report to the board about the status of the Restart program, and I know that Dr. Marr and Dr. Korn also, through the Office of Learning Recovery, are also taking a look at that to see, do we continue, do we not, how do we tweak? So that is a question that's being asked at the staff level as well. So excellent.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Excellent.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions about those 4? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Garber. EICS 5 is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly on our 2022 charter schools annual report. And so I will bring Ms. Caro up to talk us through the report that's going to be given over to the JDLOC by the 15th of this month.
All right, so following last month's presentation, there was an additional data request regarding academic comparability. I have put in the report links to prior presentations and reports this board has heard with lots and lots of data. A reminder that all of the academic data that comes through DPI goes through accountability. There is a report that is issued in September, which is the annual testing report, has detailed subgroup data as well as growth and proficiency rates. There's also a low performing report that is presented in November, and that includes the data here, although that they don't usually break it up into percentages. And the only way I thought I could really get a grasp on comparability in terms of traditional schools and charter schools is if we look at percentages, because we're talking about over 2,500 schools, traditional schools, and 204, in this case, charter schools. So if you take a look at this data, you can see that the traditional schools, again, low performing is the same whether it's a traditional or a charter school. It's a performance grade of a D and an F or F and not met or met. And for the traditionals, you can see that there was an increase from 2021 to 21-22 of 352, which places them at just under 32% of the traditional schools being classified as low performing. For the charter schools, there was a net change of 25 additional schools. That amounted to 32.84% of those of our charter schools last year being low performing. 80% of the 5 lab schools are designated low performing. For districts, we don't have, obviously, for charter schools, we don't look at districts, but for the districts, a low-performing district is one with greater than 50% of their schools low-performing. And in this case, it's 25.2%. 22%. And then for recurring traditional low-performing schools, that, although the wording is different, recurring traditional, the definition is the exact same as continually low-performing charter schools. So that's a school that has been low-performing in any 2 of the last 3 years. And you can see that there was 18.55% of traditional schools are recurring low-performing, and then 17.16% of continually low-performing charters. Some caveats: these schools, these low-performing charter schools, includes the 2 virtual schools, and because this is last year's accountability data, obviously, since we don't have this year's yet, 2 of those are closing this year, and 1 closed last year. So at the start of this next school year, we will have 64 low-performing charter schools, which is the equivalent of 31.68%, which is remarkably close to the number of traditional low-performing schools. So this, you can really dig into the low-performing data in that report that I discussed in November, and is available. I've linked it. It's available on the accountability website, but I've also linked it in the report, and we'll kind of break down exactly how many schools have, a not met and a D, a met and a D. Gets really down into the weeds with that. What I do not have is comparability for specific subgroups, charter schools versus traditionals. And I've had conversations with Dr. Marr. I've had conversations with Dr. Howard in accountability, and kind of thinking about what that would look like. Dr. Howard and I spoke this morning, and that's something that we could put into the accountability report if that's something that would be requested. Understanding that there are some differences. A main difference that I see when I look at the accountability data is the fact that accountability data for traditional schools is broken up by the school type. And for a traditional school, that means elementary, middle, and high school. So all of those 4 different types of schools, and then of course your alternative schools, get their own school performance grade. For charter schools, whether they are serving K-3 and 1 testing grade, or K-12 and they have all of those tested grades, they get 1 school performance grade. So it's important, I think, when we're looking at this data to have the time to really evaluate what those differences are and what they're telling us. I think there's some good information that could be pulled by looking at comparability data, but I think that we need the expertise of accountability, the expertise in our data departments to really understand what that data is telling us. I hope the 2 reports that you have linked in here that are very, very in the weeds will give some more, information. But this is kind of what I could get in terms of looking at traditionals versus charters in the performance, in our low-performing schools.
I need a question.
Yes. I don't know all of the information and data that's put out, certainly. But the one measure to me, if it can be, and we track students now after graduation, if the success of students after post-graduation would be a good comparison, in my opinion, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
And that would be an interesting comparison if it were available, or if it needed to be in the future.
Absolutely, I could definitely put that into our discussions about data.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Vice Chair Duncan.
So I agree that more data would be very helpful, and another area would be pulling out the demographic data for the different schools and trying to pull that together as well. So it's going to get pretty complex if you start down the data trail, which is not to say we shouldn't do it. It's just to acknowledge that it would be complex to work it through. The one piece of data I'd asked for was what the public school, traditional public school percentage was for failed to either meet or exceed growth. We've got that in the report for charter schools. I didn't see that in the report even revised for.
They do have that. The difficulty with the the accountability report that comes out is that includes all PSUs. So the overall growth for all PSUs was, I had that marked somewhere. Oh, I think maybe I put it in here. Yeah. So for all PSUs, including charters, they don't have it broken down, is 69.9%. Met or exceed, and then the number for just the charter schools is 62.6% met or exceeded.
So we've been able to break that out in previous years for the report. And so are we saying we don't know the data for the traditional public schools? If it's 69, if you combine all the PSUs, it would appear that traditional public schools percentage would be higher than 69.
I haven't seen that in this report that accountability put out, but I'm sure they could pull that in discussions with Dr. Howard. For example, based on requests last year, they now pull out the there's a specific appendix just for the virtual charter schools. So I think they could absolutely do that. It wasn't presented in this report, and I don't have it's not my.
It's not your data.
Yeah, it's not my data. So I don't want to.
Well, the reason I ask is it's been in the report in previous years.
Yeah.
So that's why I raised the question. So if we can.
Yeah, and that's why I think there's definitely a need for some more discussion with staff, with the folks that have expertise in the data and how to really make it, to the layperson to look at differences and understand, okay, this is what the percentage says, but what are we actually looking at if we're kind of, in some cases, comparing apples and oranges, especially when we look at the school performance grades and, there's one, no matter how many grade levels you have in a charter school, as opposed to breaking it out, elementary, middle, high school. And that's definitely something we're doing. Those discussions and trying to figure out how to do that accurately.
I agree the data issue is an important issue and requires some further refinement. I do think that historically, and appears still presently, that the charter schools have had a significantly higher percentage of the charter schools that have failed to meet growth or exceeded growth as compared to the traditional public schools. I think that's important information for the public.
I'd have to look into that, but we could definitely do that.
So, Ms. Becerra, could you maybe, in your spare time, right? Do you know what's before our folks that are working in the Office of Charter Schools was ready to open? Busy, but since it's not required by law to be included in this particular document, perhaps you could work with accountability.
Yeah, I'll talk to Tammy.
And the superintendent to get your arms around collecting some additional data, either July, August, September. I know you've got an aggressive schedule for
About
the summer.
September.
Yeah, September.
Okay. Yeah, let me, and we're definitely going to have those, because that, in the fall, we'll be kind of preparing to issue the next, or accountability will be preparing to issue the next testing data report, so we can definitely have those conversations about what the data should look like.
Just to be clear, my request, and this is, again, likely not in your area to respond to, but we know within the data right now for the previous year, which is the data you've been using for this, what the percentage of traditional public schools are that met or exceeded growth. And I don't want to wait till September to get that number. I think we ought to be able to get that number, again, not from your department.
Yeah.
To be clear.
I can talk to Sam.
I was referring to the disaggregation and all of the other data.
I understand that, and I understand that would take more time, so I'm gonna have to, just having the number.
Yep.
Would be something I think we have our finger on right now.
I can talk to Tammy about that today.
Thank you.
Any more questions about this report?
I have a just very quick question tied to the request for additional data. Would this additional data also would there be an expectation that CSAB refer to this data in making decisions, any decisions that they make around charter schools, let's say for the renewal process? I mean, it's wonderful to have the data, but my question is, will there be an expectation for that data to become part of a collection that CSAB must consider?
Well, I would say that we definitely, I mean, I definitely don't want there to be a misunderstanding. We use a lot of data. What I don't have access to when my area is not able to do is like those comparable, like I don't look at the traditional data usually. So when I'm comparing the two, that puts me in a different type of space. But we definitely look into, like we dig really deep into the data for any renewal school. So the ones we just recently had, those ones that were up to their 10 years of operation, they got a review of all 10 years of data. And CSAB, that's a huge part of how they make those decisions, absolutely. Yeah.
And I really want to protect, pointing the finger back at myself because I also asked this question. I do think it's important that we be careful about what we ask of staff and ask them to go back to their desk and generate this data, and they put a number and a report in front of us and we go, oh, thank you, and we push it to the side. We need to be, I'm going to go back to the scientific method. We need to be intentional about making sure, A, that we're asking the right questions, and also using the data that we ask for to take action. Otherwise, it's a piece of paper that goes in the trash can. And so let's try to work to make sure that the data that we're asking for is part of a long-term decision making, or it calls for some action for change, because it's not fair to them to go back and it's a lot of work. So let's be intentional.
So if I could just add to that, I want to be very clear. I'm being very intentional. I'm asking for one specific number that I believe we have in terms of what the percentages of our traditional public schools are that are failing to meet or exceed expectations. And the subject of charter schools and traditional public schools has been one that has been in the public dialogue for a considerable period of time. Charter schools have a budget. Part of their budget is part of their application. It's what are you going to do to market? What are you going to do to brand? That's not part of a traditional public school budget. In fact, it would be a public outcry if traditional public schools suggested we have this marketing budget. So they're very different things, and I think it is important to know what the differences are in those particular numbers. The growth of our students in our schools, I think we all agree, is an exceedingly important number. And so what it is with respect to the schools is a fair number to know. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this report. I think it should be, but it doesn't have to be. But we do need to have a facility with that number, and that is, in fact, an easy number. It's not a report that's going to go in the dustbin. It's information that's very relevant to a public dialogue that has been significant in its scope over the years. Thank you for giving me a chance to say that.
Further comments? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We've got 3 actions on first read. EICS 6 is a request from J.T. Barber Elementary in Craven County, which we had previously approved for a restart application, and they are before us asking to revise their implementation year. Ms. Carver, do you want to just highlight the opportunities that school will have for the additional year of planning before they actually embark on that process?
Yes, actually. A few bits of information about this request. They have a new principal coming in, and they have 2 new approved schools that you have approved as of May last month. And so they are simply asking that this school, because of the new principal, and these other schools would be aligned with the 3. They would all 3 be beginning the planning process, going through the planning process together, and then implementing together.
Questions? So just delays in a year. Wonderful. No questions there. EICS 7 are the nominations for the Board of Trustees for the schools of the deaf and blind. And so I see Dr.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, board members, and advisors. As you know, Session Law 2023-10 became law on April 3rd, 2023. Effective July 1, 2024, our 3 residential schools for the deaf and blind will be governed by independent boards of trustees. 1 trustee for each school will be appointed by the State Board of Education. The remaining voting members will be appointed by the North Carolina House and Senate. The president of each school's alumni association or that person's designee will serve as an ex officio non-voting member for his or her respective school. The secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services will also appoint an ex officio non-voting member for each school. The law required that initial appointments be made by June 3rd or 60 days after the date that the act became law. The qualifications indicated in the law were that appointing entities should strongly consider expertise or experience in the areas of education for those who are deaf or hard of hearing, or who are blind or visually impaired, administration and governance, finance and budgeting, or who otherwise have demonstrated concern for quality of education for those who are deaf or hard of hearing, or who are blind or visually impaired. In keeping with state board policy, each residential school has an advisory board, and those boards are charged with advising the state board on the development of policies, personnel matters, student life, conduct, curriculum, finances, and other matters as designated by the State Board of Education. Given the timeline and the symbiotic relationship that exists between the state board and the councils, we have leveraged these groups' expertise, commitment to the 3 schools, and work within their respective communities to assist with the nomination process by recommending their council peers, 1 per school, as candidates for your consideration. We have 2 before you today. For Governor Moorhead School for the Blind, Tracy Wilkerson has been unanimously endorsed by the council at Governor Moorhead. She currently works as an orientation and mobility instructor and as a Braille transcriber. She has previously worked in the Wake County school system and has 2 visually impaired children. For the Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf, Mr. Gary Farmer has been recommended. He too was unanimously endorsed by the ENCSD's council. Gary has a rich history with the school. He was a former teacher, coach, and administrator there. He is also a former member of the Wilson County Board of Education. Excited to bring these 2 recommendations to you today for consideration. The nomination for the North Carolina School for the Deaf has been delayed. The candidate has withdrawn, and that council will reconvene and reconsider a new nomination. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions or comments about these candidates?
I would like to speak, Gary Farmer, without any doubt, after his retirement, he worked with EC children at middle school in Wilson County. He's devoted his personal time and energy without failure. He stood up at a time it looked like they were going to, that the Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf would be closed. He led the effort to make sure if there was a way for it to remain open, that it did. And he's also worked with the blind at times also, School for Blind. And I couldn't be happier to see his name up there because not just happy for him, but that a good decision has been made. I cannot think of not one thread of information that would make me think he shouldn't be there. And, I'm pleased to see his nomination. Thank you.
Both the state board and our state superintendent have expressed and shown commitment to these schools, and during this transition period, we're fully committed to developing and executing a solid transition plan, and this is step 2. Step 1 was an initial report to the JLOC, and this piece of the nominations is step 2.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan, for presenting those names and for the kind words of affirmation for the candidates. And I will just point out for the state board that both of the recommendations are coming out of those advisory councils and have unanimous approval of those. And that is really critical moving forward with this new structure, that those folks who have been working tirelessly on behalf of those students and those schools have someone that they feel like adequately represents them. Okay, EICS 8 is a request from Aristotle Prep to relocate in Charlotte. As you know, when a charter school requests to move outside of the boundaries set forth in charter school law, they do have to come before us to approve that request. And Ms. Vaquero, would you like to share the particulars of this particular school's?
Yes, absolutely. So Aristotle is a charter school located in Charlotte. They have been operating for 10 years, serving grades K to 8, and they've been in an older facility. I think it was built in the 70s that has had a number of issues. They've had mold issues. They've had like health kind of citations, those sort of things that they've been wanting to move. And a new facility has become available. This facility currently houses a charter school that is closing this year. The new charter school would be about 15 miles distance-wise and 27 driving distance from the current location. So it would require your approval. The school is a Title I school. They meet the requirements for the transportation grant. They provide busing. They will continue to provide busing to their parents. They provide free and reduced meals to all of their students. They, they currently have about 127 students. This building that is, I think it's been only open for a year or two, so pretty much very, very new, has a capacity of about 450. So over time, they would be able to increase the number of students they have. It will be a safe, well-built building. And they're hoping that some of the students that no longer will have the charter school that is closing will, choose to enroll in this school if they would like to do that. They have submitted a lot of documentation. They've submitted a heat map kind of showing the locations of their current students. The current location is on the more towards the west side of Charlotte, so the new location is a bit east, and you can see in the heat map that their students are really all over the central Charlotte area, so they do not have concerns about retaining their students. Their demographics are, out of the 127-ish enrolled, over 100 are black students, a few Hispanic, 6 multiracial, and 12 white students, so it's a majority-minority school. They've also submitted a site prospect list, which you can see is very extensive. They've done over a year, I believe more than a year, of trying to find property in Charlotte, which is very difficult at the time, you can imagine. So they've submitted that to kind of show that they've put in their due diligence. They've done their work to make sure that they, to try to find a school to move these students and teachers to. And they have also submitted their the building code information and a report on mold and other issues that the school has had, just to kind of support the fact that they need to move. This building is available, and the CSAB has approved it. They heard this request last month. It's coming action on first reading because they are hoping to move in July. And of course, when you have students you're trying to enroll into a charter school, the quicker you can get notice that you will be in a different building, the better. Questions?
Questions?
Quick question.
Sure.
school that, and I might have it mixed up,
It's okay.
what I'm asking, that the building that they're moving into, they're looking to purchase it in a year,
Correct,
and the price for that building is $10 million?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
With 127 students?
Yeah, well, the capacity would be closer to
Right.
500, but yeah, over time. Yeah. This school does have a lot of support from their management company.
Yeah.
So, a non-management company charter schools would probably not be able to do that.
Thank you.
Vice Chair?
Just to follow up on that, the management company's Charter One, is that correct?
Correct.
Have they been the management company for this entity?
They did not start with this school. The change in management company, I believe, was approved a year or two ago. So it came before your board, like any management company changes do. So this is for Charter One, this is I think this is the only low-performing school they manage, but it was a school that they essentially took over 7 or 8 years into its operations.
Right, and did Aristotle just get a renewal?
They did, a 3-year renewal.
And my recollection is that was not a unanimous vote of the board to renew it. Am I recalling that correctly?
I don't recall. I'd have to look back at that vote for this school.
In any event, the CSAB board must have had some concerns to only recommend a 3-year renewal.
Yes, and it had academic concerns. It is a low-performing school, so I think the vast majority of the continually low-performing schools would get a 3-year renewal.
As I looked at the CSAB minutes, there was considerable concern expressed, although it was voted for, I think, 5 to 1 or 6 to 1.
Mhm.
As you expressed, there was considerable concern expressed about whether or not they could meet the leasing payments
Mhm.
and or could meet the purchase price after a year, which appears to be the plan. Is that a fair summary of what got said?
Yes. And I have spoken to the representatives for Aristotle, and a lot of the discussion and the kind of feedback that they received from CSAB has been used to work on negotiating the lease that they're waiting to sign based on your decision. But I think that discussion was helpful in them understanding,
That moves to the last question. We don't have a copy of that lease at this point, do we?
No, I believe I could probably get a draft one. This morning I was told they're working on trying to get some of the fine print figured out, and working on some of the feedback from CSAB.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Blackburn?
If I might add, one of the issues we were dealing with this when we met in committee is that the building that they're operating in currently is really unsafe. So that's the reason that it's actually on first reading, is that we really should not have kids back in that space again at this point. So that's one of the things I'm going to have.
I will also say there's not, the 3-year renewal was based on academics. There's no, to my knowledge, I don't believe they're on, they don't have a financial non-compliance issue or anything that would kind of raise those considerations.
Additionally, they were asked to manage the school right before COVID hit.
You talking about the
Yes.
Charter One? Yeah.
Yes. So they really haven't had an opportunity to demonstrate new instructional practices to see if they realize any academic gains. And so Superintendent Truitt, you had your hand up.
That's what I was going to ask. You answered my question.
Question.
I
Ms. Hammond.
happen to have that document from the renewal discussion, and they did neglect the question.
Anything
So,
else?
yeah, I understood the comment that John just made, and understood that was the reason for the move. My concern is not that. My concern is the viability from a financial standpoint of making that kind of move with that type of student enrollment, and being in a position to be able to financially have the wherewithal to proceed forward. So that's my
And I think, that was, I think, thoroughly discussed at CSAB. And, you know, based on the approval, I think that they have felt that they would be able to meet that. The Charter One has also agreed that the management fee is subordinate to the lease. So if for some reason there was a need to, like, you know, divert money towards the lease as opposed to the management fee is coming last, or not coming.
Which is why it'd be helpful to have the documentation so we have a better understanding what the arrangement is.
And I hear you on that, Vice Chair Duncan, but the state board's responsibility is to decide whether or not to approve the move. And the contractual agreement by which the management company or the operating nonprofit board has a lease with the available space is really a decision that's made by that nonprofit board, not by the state board. And so otherwise, you would be inserting yourselves into the leasing agreements for 206 charter schools across the state of North Carolina. So it's up to us. Our requirement is that we decide whether or not they have the ability to relocate, but the organization would have to make the financial decision for itself. You know, are we leasing? Are we purchasing? That's their responsibility, not ours.
I agree, it is their responsibility to enter into those. It's our responsibility then to make a determination as to whether that's viable and therefore provides the appropriate environment and the financial support and stability for the students who will go there.
And again, I would argue against, so then you would want to know, you would say, okay, to X management company, show me all your financial records. Tell me whether or not you're financially, and that, so if you're doing that, then you're asking that for the other schools in our state that have lease agreements with the facilities through which they operate a charter school. I mean, that falls within the purview of that. When we offer them that charter, we say to them, we've offered you this charter, and you figure out your lease, you figure out how to hire your teachers, you have to figure out what your curriculum is, you have to, it's just one of those things. Our job, we can't decide for them. It's not our job to decide for them whether they're have the financial capacity to lease or purchase. If they can't do it, they'll be back before us in a year or 2 years and say, well, this didn't work. We're out, we gotta close.
We will agree to disagree about where our, rather than prolong an extended discussion.
Okay, any other questions? Awesome. We have one discussion item. Ms. Caro.
I'm still up here, okay.
But thank you for your time here with us today. These are the ready to open preliminary recommendations. So this is the first round of, are these schools moving in the right direction to be able to open this August? They have interviewed these schools. The final recommendations will come at the next board meeting.
Correct. So these, the 7 schools that we have today, we actually started with 12, we're now down to 7. This board has previously approved these charter schools through the charter application process. Then they enter a program, which is statutorily required. There's a statutory requirement for a planning year program. We call that program the RTO, or the Ready to Open program, and it takes place usually, depending, for most schools on a standard timeline, about 2 years. For our accelerated schools, you approve them, and then usually sometime like early in the year, and then that next fall they open. So they're quicker. But most schools, they spend at least 2 years in RTO. And then, as you know, many of our schools have delayed, which is why we have only 7 this year out of the 12 that were scheduled to open. So why you get the preliminary recommendations in June is because we have several different steps that take place throughout the year for submissions of documents, for interviews in front of the CSAB, for really weekly our staff is touching base with these schools to help them get to where they can open. And our final review takes place now, during this month. Actually, next week, we have the final interview in front of CSAB, and then we also have a 2-day training period we do for the new charter school leaders. So in order to get you a preview and have it on your agenda for 2 months, we do preliminary recommendations, and then next meeting in July, I will present you with the final recommendation from CSAB as to whether they approve them as ready to open or not. There are 4 kind of internal guidelines that we use and the Charter Schools Advisory Board uses. The first is enrollment, so we're looking to see at least 75% of the projected enrollment. Obviously, the closer to 100% or more, the better. But that helps us understand that this school would be viable, that they will have the enrollment needed to meet their budget. We look for facility. We need to see substantial progress towards receipt of the ECO. A lot of our schools, like the Educational Certificate of Occupancy, they might not receive that until a couple days before students enter. So we don't necessarily have those at this point. We are looking for a timeline and the evidence that they are on schedule to get it. And then every school has to have a contingency plan in place. We are looking at the budget, so obviously a regular budget, but also a break-even budget, which would be a reduced number of enrollees. And then our RTO progress report. These are based on submissions. We have 2 throughout the year prior to opening. The staff in the Office of Charter Schools just reviewed the final submissions last week. They've had this week, it's a very quick turnaround, they have this week to work with the schools to make any improvements that they may need to make to things such as like a transportation plan or school lunch plans, things like that. And then those reports are presented to CSAB next week. And that's how they interview any schools that we feel have insufficient areas or are not meeting some of these minimum guidelines, and then that's where they will make their final recommendation. So just to kind of give you that timeline, they will, all of these schools will be before the CSAB presented next week. So there's 7 schools. The first one is Mountain City Public Montessori, and I have updated enrollment data just because of the deadlines to submit the PowerPoint, which I'll give you, but this is an accelerated applicant. It's a small school, K-6, but the year 1 ADM is only 106. And at I believe it's Asheville City Schools, last year closed their only public Montessori school, so there has been a great demand for Montessori education, and right now they are at 100% enrolled with 249 students on the wait list. So we don't have concerns with them meeting their enrollment. Their first day of school is August 22nd, and they have a facility. Part of the acceleration requirements is having a facility, pretty much locked down. And I actually go and visit those. So this one is a beautiful church, and right in downtown Asheville. They have a lot of partnerships happening with the local community. There's a low-income housing development that's being built within walking distance to the school. So they are on target to open and meet their requirements. Aspire Trade High School, this is one of the schools that has requested an additional 30, this is the school that requested an additional 32 students. They have had 2 delays due to facility delays. They will be a specialized trade high school. They are opening with 9th to 10th grade. They are currently at 79% of their ADM. And that would be if you approve this greater number. They are scheduled to open August 23rd, so they have several more months to prepare, and they are also on target to receive their ECO, their Certificate of Occupancy, probably about a month before school opens. They have already been in collaboration with the CTE division here and Skills USA to kind of get some expertise and feedback on their program as they get started and to have that collaboration set up. But it is a full CTE trade program. The next school is Wayne STEM. They have not had a delay. They are opening in Wayne County, K-5, and they are currently at 80% of their enrollment. Their first day of school is August 28th, and they have modulars purchased. We're just waiting to get confirmation that everything has been set up correctly and that they have those ECOs coming. Movement School Northwest. This is the school that has requested the decrease in enrollment, and they are currently at 77% enrollment. They open very small, K-1 with just 102 students. Well, I believe actually they're asking for 150 now. Also opening towards the end of August, and they are retrofitting. They usually retrofit like an old retail shop, like that's kind of what they usually go in and do. So they are on target to be opened and ready to go. The next school is Bonnie Cone Leadership Academy. This was a 2020 applicant, so they've had one delay. This is our largest opening. They are opening in Mecklenburg County, K-10. Their approved year one ADM is 1,725, and they're currently at 68% enrollment, I believe, as of early this week. Their first day of school is August 21st, and they also are just working on trying to get they need some of their final, like, transportation things handled, and then parking, driveways, those sort of things, but they're on schedule to get their certificate of occupancy at least a month or two prior to school opening. Legacy Classical Academy is in Rockingham. I believe this is the only charter school in that county. They were accelerated. They are K-4, and they are currently at 71% enrollment. They are scheduled to open August 17th, and they are also in a church facility that has been checked out and is ready to go. They just have to get water fountains completed, which may be done. I don't have an update on that. And then finally, our last school is the School of the Arts for Boys. This is opening in Chatham County. They are currently at 66% enrollment, so they've made a lot of progress the last few weeks. They are scheduled to open in mid-August, and they have finally, they were having trouble finding a facility. They finally have finalized a lease between a facility they will be moving into a daycare that is now no longer operating. That will be closing. So they're going to be taking that space, and they just have a few, I believe, updates they need to make to the space and get their inspections, and they should be, we're hoping to have that done by mid-July. So those are the seven, I think that's seven, scheduled to open in the fall. Most of them are opening towards the end of August, so they have a couple more months to plan. We have our big institute next week with the school leaders to help them get on the right footing, get them acclimated to all the different people they work with in DPI. They have training from legal, from school business, EC, all of the kind of essential departments. Any questions?
Thank you for the update. Questions about a particular school on the list? Ms. McCarroll, what happens to a school that does not meet the enrollment projections? There was a school up here that still needs to recruit at least 38 students to meet the required percentage. So tell us what happens with that.
When they come before CSAB next week, that will definitely be like anyone that's not at that 75%, that's a big topic of conversation. Usually what we see is the CSAB will ask for their plan for the next couple weeks to get those final enrollments in. We don't have any sometimes we have schools that are really low, and in that case, we often suggest that they might consider a delay. In this case, I think most of them are very close to getting there, so they need to come with a plan with updated numbers, and then CSAB will make their kind of recommendation whether they think they're going to get over that hill. And then they also always submit break-even budgets. So if there's a concern that they're not going to hit that target exactly, we want to see, and the CSAB wants to see that they have a budget in place that takes that into account for the reduced funding.
Thank you, Ms. White. We now have one item on the Healthy Responsible Students agenda. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm Reginald Lucchino along with Vice Chair Mr. Alan Duncan. And Mr. Chair, before you have one discussion item, that'll be dealing with the middle school athletics manual amendments that Dr. Essie will proceed to tell us about. Thank you, Dr. Essie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Keenan. Good afternoon. Lunch in 2 minutes. I bring back to you this year the middle school manual updates. We bring those to you each year around this time so that our districts will have them when they start back. You have a document that shows you exactly what's been changed throughout the manual. You can see each of those changes. The only thing that wasn't a editing type of change was an addition of mercy rules for our schools. Most of our districts, which are controlled locally, already use mercy rules so that they're not playing games that last for many hours. But they ask that we put those in the manual so they'll reflect what's already happening, and also so they have something to fall back on in the middle school manual. So that's the only significant addition to the manual. Everything else stays pretty much the same with just some editing updates.
Any comments, questions? If not, let's eat.
Thanks, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Keenan. Thank you, Dr. Essex. We'll now break for lunch and return at 1:45. 1:45.